Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm very happy to welcome you once again here at the Russian International Affairs Council at our session, at our analysis, which is actually the conflict in the African Great Lakes region and the Russia's position. This session is held as part of the African direction of the RIAC that we started a few years ago, right after the first Russian African summit. And over these 5 years, as we are doing this, and we are hoping to continue this work very successfully, we publish books, we publish reports, scientific reports and papers. It can be one author or a group of authors. We also publish articles and books, and we do it after the sessions, or sometimes we just order this. After this session, maybe another work will be written by us, and we will see how it works. So some part of our publications are here at your tables. You could see them. So all of them are digitized, and all of them can be found on our official website. So today we are having this session in a mixed format. So we have different sessions, roundtables, workshops, seminars, but today we have this kind of session, situational analysis. And in my view, it's like friends who gathered at one table and want to discuss this same problem, but everyone will stand for their interests, of course. And the goal of our today's session, as it is written in the introduction to our agenda, is to build recommendations. At least we will do our best to do this, given your presentations, your opinions, your positions. We will try to do this over this session, over this day, and of course, we will discuss it later on when our event will be over. But more specifically about the methodology, Maya will tell you about it. Maya Viktorovna. So she is from Goma University. And she is now the acting director of the Center for African Studies in Goma University. Also, we have specialists and experts from different analytical and educational centers. We're very happy to welcome them. And also we have people from 5 African countries who have joined us, and we are very thankful for them. And they will also convey their positions to us. I have to say that we are having a simultaneous interpretation from Russian into English and from English into Russian, and each participant can speak whatever language it is convenient for them. As Maya said, we have special receivers to get interpretation, and experts who joined us in Zoom, they just need to switch channels from Russian into English and from English into Russian. So basically that's it for the introduction. I wish you very productive and fruitful work. And now I would like to give the floor to Oleg Barabanov for his welcoming remarks. Oleg, Mr. Barabanov, over to you. Thank you very much, Ms. Bagdasarova. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today at the situational analysis. The Russian International Affairs Council carries out a very big work, expert work, and recommendational work. And African direction is very important to us, thanks to Tatiana Bogdasarova efforts. And I also represent the Valdai International Discussion Club, and we pay special attention to such issues as well when it comes to African development and cooperation between Africa and Russia. Before Russian-African Summit, Russia and Africa also had their own Valdai Conference on Russian-African cooperation. And for the first summit and for the second summit, we have published our reports on these sessions. They are available both in Russian and in English. They can be found on the Valdai website, valdai.com. And in fact, the topic of Africa is quite relevant for Russia nowadays. Current political situation, it's obvious there are no alternatives for this course, for this direction, and we discussed it with Maya Nikolskaya before the analysis. It is very important that African topic generally in Russia doesn't rise in 4 years when we have another summit, when everyone is up, when everyone is trying to write something, to hold conferences, and then everyone just falls asleep for the next 4 years. Of course, it's not about the people who are here at the session, but nonetheless, I'm hoping that over this year that passed since the last summit showed that the African topic will not disappear and will not disappear from the political agenda of Russia in the next 4 years. And it is very good and it is very nice. And the topic of situational analysis has a very big significance because we are talking about acute conflict that lasts for many years, and it is related to colonial Belgium legacy. Here, if we compare negative impacts of different countries, English colonialism, Portugal, Belgium, so maybe Belgian colony policy had the biggest impact because we see that there are a lot of conflicts in different former colonies. So they continue. And unfortunately, at the moment, we don't see a real way out of the situation. So one of the strategic tasks of our today's analysis is to discuss what can be done with these regards. Our second goal for us, for Russians, is to understand what Russia can do to settle this conflict. We have seen that over the recent years, Russia and structures related to Russia, structures related to East African community have become equal partners of actors at the security market in Africa. But most of all, it's about other sub-region of Africa, Francophone region Sahel, and in the African Great Lakes region, Russia is not very active. However, development of political relations with the range of countries of this region can also play its role, and Russia can have a bigger impact, a bigger contribution to settle security in this region and in settling the conflicts. At least we see that the cooperation between Russia and Uganda are growing. We have certain dialogue with Rwanda. We also have building better relations with Burundi. So that's why we will see how this is going to develop. We will discuss it. Thank you once again, Ms. Bagdasarova, to you and to Ms. Nikolskaya.
Thank you, Oleg Nikolaevich. I hope that today we're going to make our contribution in resolving the situation, and we'll not forget Russia-Africa relations for the next 4 years. And we're going to continue this work. And now I would like to give floor to Maya Nikolskaya. She is our moderator for today's session. And she's our partner. We have organized this session together. Thank you very much, Tatiana. and Oleg for this introduction. Yes, it's really very good that the African topic has been coming to the fore for many analytical and research organizations.
But before we actually start, because I have a request from our colleagues online, in order to use the translation, you have a symbol that looks like a globe on your panel. You need to click that symbol and choose the language of translation and see if this works for you. And this is how you will be able to understand whatever is being said here, because the main language of this situational analysis is obviously going to be Russian. If there is still any technical difficulty that you're experiencing, please let us know. In the meantime, let's continue in Russian.
So the region of the Great African Lakes has been out of the focus of the mainstream media for some time because it is a bit off the track, and the tragic developments over the past decades have been to a large part ignored. Around the genocide, people woke up too late, and there were two genocides in Burundi, and towards 1996, 1997, and to 2003. But to Africa, everything was going on there is of decisive nature because it is a magnet to many African players, as we have seen. A lot of countries have been involved there, in particular in the Second Congolese War. They call it the First World War on the African continent. And we know that geographically, there's the line of the Great African Recess there. And there's this danger, or at least we believe so, that this line can coincide with the line of the new African political divide. And we have selected this non-standard format together with Tatiana Bagdasarova. Basically, in an ideal case, we at this table, in this narrow circle of professional African experts, would also have representatives of the Rwanda government, Congolese government, governments of other countries from the region that have been involved in this conflict or have been related to this conflict. The administration of North and South Kivu and other provinces. We've tried our best to compensate. Tatiana has invited Alexei Demidov here. He's one of the key humanitarian organizations there, the Red Cross. Anyway, we asked you to get prepared, to, to do some homework, so to say, to compensate for this lack of information on various items. And we're going to try and look for answers to questions rather than just hold a conference. So this is the format we're going to have. We will ask each of you to express your opinion on each of the questions. You have the handouts on your tables. And for those on Zoom, joining us over Zoom, you have received these handouts at your emails. You have the list of participants to understand better who's going to speak today. You have the questionnaire for pestle analysis. To the situation analysis, we have taken this marketing scheme that is usually applied by corporations to identify the risks and opportunities, to understand what's going to happen. The first three questions will be discussed before the coffee break until 12 Moscow time. And last but not least, you have this sheet with trigger factors. This is a reminder. It's only a part of the questions to find your way better. So please make sure to use all these materials. So if you have no questions, then I'd like to discuss the timing. If what you're speaking about is directly related to the area of your research, you've done your homework, then we'll ask you to speak for not more than 5 minutes. All others joining us, we kindly ask you also to express your opinion on all of the 6 questions. It's a free discussion format. We will try our best, maybe not to find the real truth in our discussion, but at least to discuss things rather than just uh, read off your paper in a monologue. We all have an idea of what's going on in the region of the Great African Lakes. So without further ado, without further introductions, let us proceed to question number 1. So we will ask our African colleagues to speak as well. You can raise any questions. And again, if you haven't prepared, then please not more than 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, a very brief comment on any of these questions. We're beginning with item number 1. How can you classify the conflict in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo? We'll give floor to Tatiana Denisova to begin, because you have been dealing professionally with this question for many years now. So Tatiana Denisova, she represents the Africa Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Yes, esteemed colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event. I didn't expect that I would be the first to speak, but well, that's my fate, to be the leader. As for classifying this conflict, well, I think that first of all, it's a very old conflict, and old conflicts have their special features. These conflicts are harder to resolve, harder to settle, uh, as opposed to conflicts that arise on over a particular case where parties to that concrete conflict that happens and develops very quickly. Parties lose interest in that conflict very quickly too. Conflicts like that are easier to resolve, but old conflicts, the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC, go back to the 18th century when Rwandans started to move to the present territory of Congo. And this animosity between various tribes has been there ever since. And the animosity between Tutsis and Hutus just added up to this. And then there was the genocide of 1994. We all know about it very well. But I would like to say here that we've been dealing these African conflicts, looking at these African conflicts from the European point of view, so to say. Yes, violence is very bad. Rape is very bad. Children suffering is no good at all. But these conflicts arise in very concrete situations, which a European finds difficult to understand. And in this respect, the conflict between the DRC and Rwanda doesn't differ that much from other conflicts. For instance, in the region of the Lake of Chad, it's also somewhere on the outskirts, like in the east of Congo. And the local communities have been creating their own ways to survive and even to get better. Something we find abnormal. These endless illegal activities, illegal economy, smuggling, illegal mining, something which we believe is not normal, something that we believe should be stopped as quickly as possible to start proper development. In the African situation, is not regarded to be abnormal. People don't believe this is abnormal because smuggling has been there for centuries. People still use these smuggling routes, and where there's no stage where the government does not manifest itself, the government doesn't provide any social services, does not control situation in these regions, people clearly are forced to survive the way they can survive. So I, for one, don't see anything bad about this illegal activity, because you simply have to feed your family. Because when you take up the arms, when you see your children's hungry eyes, or when you see easy ways to get richer, then clearly you are ready to overcome any barriers to reach your goal. Conflicts between Rwanda and Congo are exacerbated by the rich mineral deposits in that area, unlike the region around the Chad Lake, where the mechanisms for survival are about the same. But when the plethora of natural resources is added up to this, and practically everyone, the population, the military, the local army units, but also transnational corporations uh, uh, have a finger in that pie. Various armed groups that have been waging endless wars. And the conflict between Rwanda and Congo is not a bloody conflict. Not so many people have been killed there. Whereas clashes between armed groups that grew from local militias, armed groups that have been trying to get control over these deposits or smuggling routes, the number of casualties there is much higher than the number of casualties in the conflicts. So I wouldn't say that that conflict is is a real threat from the humanitarian point of view. Although that said, it must be resolved because, well, because we finally have to start proper peaceful life. But this peaceful life, in my opinion, well, I think that this conflict cannot be resolved in the near future because people are get used to living the way they're living now. That's one. Two, it takes political will, in particular, the political will of the government of the DRC. Sorry to interrupt you. Let us discuss this a bit later. Let's now focus on the first part. So you have given us a very good description of the history of the conflict. So this did not begin yesterday. Something which began several centuries ago in the 17th century cannot be stopped at the overnight. Yes, all I want to say that the international and the inter-ethnic conflict, it's an international conflict, inter-ethnic conflict over in natural deposits, it has lots of classifications, but I will not take any more of your time. Yes, thank you, Tatiana Sergeyevna. I know that one of our colleagues over Zoom Captain Kiki, are you with us? Yeah, Captain Kiki and Janka, independent political expert. Can you hear us? If you can, I know that Mr. Janka has got his own point of view on the main reason of this conflict. Hello.
Hello, good morning from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm well, can you see me? Okay. Thank you, thank you. I'll go straight to the point. We, first of all, need to see first of all, we need to understand the genesis of the problem in the Great Lakes, in the Eastern DRC. And yes, as Tatiana earlier mentioned, it's not a problem that started a few decades ago. No, it's been here with us for a long time, and it's been simmering. And we've got to come up with very decisive and deliberate actions to resolve this issue. Otherwise, it will be with us for another many more generations. Now, we need to go back and figure out that at some stage, there were physical boundaries or borders of the Eastern DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi, which at some stage were really one state called Rwanda-Urundi, okay? And these were being administered by the East African German Protectorate. But before this, remember that the Congo Free State was an actual personal possession of the Belgian king. Now, he had the same problem in the early 1800s that is being encountered today by the government of DRC. Ladies and gentlemen, the Eastern DRC, and in this state, in this case, I talk about the Kivus, that's North and South Kivu, and Goma really being the capital of this area, is over 5,000 kilometers from Kinshasa. There is no physical infrastructure connecting, there's no road connecting Eastern DRC to Congo. There's no physical infrastructure in place to connect the western part of Congo to the eastern part. And the government has never been able to have an administrative footprint in the Kivus. It's never happened, and it's still not going to happen because you've got a long, long way. You've got to cross the length and breadth of the Congo forest to get to either Kinshasa or Goma. And that's a really tall task for any government. Any government in place in Kinshasa has been experiencing the same problem. As we speak today, you've got to figure out Rwanda, which is said to be the country that's supporting the M23 rebellion, is a country of less than what, 13 million people? Okay. If you look at their military strength, it's not it's inexplicable for you to try and explain how a force of over 400,000 with militia Congolese army is unable to subdue a country or a region that's being backed by a country which has less than 50,000 men under arms. It doesn't make sense. But again, there's lots of other intricacies and going-ons that have happened in the past from the years of Mobutu, the late Mobutu, and these things have run on and continued till today.
Basically, you are saying so that this is just another outbreak. Да, вы говорите о том, что это очередной раунд, очередной.
You say that this is just yet another round of the conflict that's been going on for many generations.
Yes. And you need to remember, this is very key. Remember, Mobutu at some stage passed a legislation. There were several over the years, but at some stage, I think it was 1985, he actually denaturalized the Congolese Tutsi. Now, this was a major problem because you have this huge number of people who have settled for over 2-3 generations. Now you're asking them to leave. To leave to go where? These people have no contacts anymore. There are 3 generations in Congo. You're asking them to go back to Rwanda. They don't have any contacts in Rwanda. And there's no way that they're going to go back to Rwanda without the land. The land is key. They need the land. They will not go anywhere without the land. And we will be here another generation to come if the dispute is not resolved, factoring in the land distribution. Okay? And again, remember, there are 2 distinct groupings of the Tutsi. You wouldn't know it until you are a resident in the area and you get to understand the history. There's a history of the Tutsis who are called the Banyamulenge. They're more in the southern part, in South Kivu, and they settled in the early 1800s, and they were the cattle keepers who flocked into that part of Congo, remembering that Eastern DRC, what we know today as Eastern DRC, was under German administration. So there were no physical borders of Rwanda and Burundi and Eastern DRC. It just continued over from Rwanda and Burundi and into the present-day Congo, okay? So they lived in these areas, they settled in these areas. Now, there's another group of distinct Tutsi. These are those who are in North Kivu, and these came more recently, and they came after the genocides, both in Burundi and in Rwanda, and they found themselves as a big community again of Tutsi in North Kivu. Now, those also need to be factored in, all right? So there's a big grouping in both North and South who can't be wished away. And the truth of the matter is, it is not going to take a small, can we say, conference and see how we're going to sort it out. No, this is actually possibly even the United Nations will have to sit down and talk. It's an African initiative, but it's going to take the whole world to resolve this issue, because the minerals that we know in that part of the world are going to be a driver to increase the number of participants in the dispute. Remember, look at how many years the
Капитан Кики, я вынуждена вас прервать для того, чтобы у нас все имели...
Captain Kiki, very sorry, I have to
Yes,
interrupt you
sorry.
so
Go
that
ahead,
we give an opportunity all to speak.
Yes.
Okay. As for how we can settle the conflict, we'll get back to this in the second part.
Okay.
I hope you will stay with us. You have raised a very important question now. Thank you very much for your contribution. So you have raised a very important question, which we didn't take into account in our trigger factors,
Yes.
namely the land, namely where these people can be settled, the Rwanda residents, the two groupings, Banyi and Mulenge, that found themselves in that area in the 17th, 18th centuries, in the Kivus, which Tatiana Bagdasarova mentioned. And the second grouping is the people who emigrated there a short time ago. So the question is, why can they return? If they repatriate one way or another, what are they going to do there? They have no connection there, have no roots there. So,
Can I answer that?
Let me give the floor to somebody else.
Okay.
We have a proper discussion, and I'm really sorry, I will have to be tough today. Извините, я буду всех прямо жестко прерывать для того, чтобы у нас было время, чтобы мы укладывали.
Yeah, I have to be tough. I have to interrupt you today. Sorry.
Thank you.
There's an opinion that the personality factor has to be taken into account. This pain, this competition between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, this competition over who's going to administer the North Kivu and South Kivu, two leaders have failed to find the common ground. So Sergei Karavai from the Institute for Foreign Affairs. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Thank you very much. Yes. I would like to be very brief on this. You know, it's not like a conflict that cannot be resolved. But we see here that there are persons with very strong wills. Kagame is not an easy person. You cannot paint this person in just one paint, right? So to say. But he's got several features in his nature. He's a very tough person. He has some principles. Even if these are his own principles, he's very pragmatic. And he's, how should I say this, self-disciplinarian. This is self-discipline on the brink of cruelty. If we look back at 2019, there was a honeymoon between Kagame and Chedese. They even hugged each other in person. All went on very well, and political commentators back then would write that Tshisekedi would rule to the extent that Kabila would let him. That was a very popular opinion back then. But later, Tshisekedi started to pursue an independent policy, and he would show he was independent from Kabila, and he established very good relations with Uganda and Burundi, who had very tense relations with the other country. And this is where Kagame felt betrayed or something like betrayed. So Rwanda was all of a sudden surrounded by enemies. And I believe that Paul Kagame took it very personal, very personal. And this served as yet another trigger to further development of the conflict. Alliances have slightly changed since then. Relations have improved, but still Kagame is a person who forgets nothing and forgives nothing. And this is something which is going to influence this situation really strong. Okay, thank you, Sergey. Yes, Tatiana, please. I would agree with Sergey on this. Indeed, I think the name is Kagame, not Kagame. So he's a very well, he's a military person. He established a civil regime, but he's still the leader of this patriotic front. But I think that it is not only about this. The real reason is that after about 1 million Hutus fled to Rwanda after the genocide, the GRC, they established their Hutu land there, and they squatted a lot of land. They bought some, they occupied other land. They started to establish not their own military and industrial organizations and armed groupings, but also trade outlets and industrial companies. So they have basically occupied the eastern part of the Congo. So after the Tshisekedi came to power in 2019, he said that he would like to improve relations with Rwanda, and he would like to control the illegal economic operations in the east of Congo. Kagame didn't like that because resolving conflicts means that treaties have to be signed and honored. And in any case, honoring any treaty, any agreement would not be in the interest of Rwanda, because currently Rwanda has been getting a lot of revenues from developing the deposits in the east of Congo, gold, diamonds, other mineral deposits. If Tshisekedi succeeds getting control over the eastern part of Congo, then Rwanda would lose a lot of revenues. So that is why there are too many parties interested in this conflict. Kagame and Rwanda are interested in this conflict. So is Burundi, even Tanzania, to a certain extent, a very peaceful country. Is the only party who's not interested in this is the government in Kinshasa, only Tshisekedi, who really wants to get control over the eastern part of the country. But so far, all the parties are more or less satisfied, except for Tshisekedi, with this conflict, so the conflict will continue. Thank you. Yes, Sergey, please. Yes, there's another point to it. I am a former mass media employee, so over the past 18 months, there has been this trend. One of the trends in covering this conflict, the historical part of this conflict. Tutsis have been demonized in relation to this conflict. Because not only Tutsis, but also others have perished in this conflict, including Hutus. And currently, the opposition to Kagame have been using various mass media saying that the Kagame has been demonizing the Hutus. Well, I think this is sort of a campaign. No, Kagame pays attention to everyone, but because he has got the mentality of a military person, a very meticulous military person. He's not just a commander; he's the head of the operations department, if I may say so. So he sees this campaign. He believes that, as I believe, that the DRC is behind this campaign, which is yet another factor of irritation for him. Yeah, yes, please. Our friend analyst from Senegal, please. Yes, all you said is true. It's like an elephant. What? How can we define an elephant if you haven't seen one? Yes, yes. Kagame is like that. He was threatened. His son was killed. He had to save Rwanda, etc., etc. That is very clear. I will not be long. So it's mainly about the resources, but the resources are there for survival. I'm a biologist, so to me, it's a I understand how biological systems work. So it's about survival. So, un until we have solved the survival questions, the conflict will continue. That's one. Two, we should look at it from the prism of West versus East. There are a lot of intricate questions to this, personal questions, etc., etc. But what we're lacking currently, we need to understand the local culture, the we need to bear in mind how Africans can react to this. But uh, we need to. How did they? Uh, how did they use? They took into account the local factors to understand what's going on. How did we find a way to resolve conflict in other regions? We took into account the local factors. There are lots of conflicts in other regions as well. But we have been able to resolve these conflicts 10 years later, 15 years later, 15 years later. Thank you very much. A very valuable contribution. We'll get back to what you said in the second part of the session when we discuss how to resolve this conflict. And now our colleagues over Zoom have listened to opinions of Russian colleagues and other colleagues. And now we're really keen to understand how people from Rwanda and Congo. Thank you, but I think that Edgar Tawara from Uganda is with us. So, so let's first give the floor to Valens Manirangena. Uh, Mr. Jack Mohinda, are you with us? Okay, great. Okay, so let's give floor
Yes, I am
to.
with you.
Uh, so let's do it like this. First, Mr. Valens Manirangena, and then Jack Mohinda. We'll be discussing Paul Kagame for some minutes. So I would like to ask you to share your opinion on what you think about it. So let's get back to the first two items. How to classify this conflict, and what would be the main trigger factor for this conflict? In other words, what is the main reason for this conflict? Why cannot this conflict be resolved at the moment? So let's first give floor to Valens, then to Jack Mohinda, and then to Edgar Tabak. Okay, thank you. You're on. I thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. You know, I believe that all the colleagues that have spoken here had a point. But I believe the conflict in the east of the Congo is, in fact, a continuation of the conflict in Rwanda, which unfortunately, despite the way the world has been looking at this, has not resolved. It's been going on for 30 years. I think it will continue. And clearly, the Democratic Republic of Congo will be involved in it. Because the fact that Kagame came to power, who came to power through blood, and the international tribunal that was established to held people accountable, but there was only one part. But in a civil war, not only just one party can be held accountable. So this unfair treatment is there, and as long as it is there, Kagame believes that the war in the Congo is a way to protect themselves, because in that way he will ensure that he and the people who help him to come to power, they will be able to protect their interests. So, and he's been playing the role uh, that will satisfy him and the people who brought him to power. And he feels that he should not go. One of the colleagues said here that the Hutus flee to Congo and start to do their business. Well, I should say here that one of the colleagues of Kagame, former chief of the general staff of the DRC, Kabir Senior, said a short time ago that currently the situation is difficult for them because if there's another conflict in Rwanda, another military conflict in Rwanda, the Tutsis in Rwanda will not be able to find uh, uh, a way to hide themselves in other country. So I don't think that we need to look at the conflict in the Congo as opposed to the conflict in Rwanda. Thank you, Valens. So I think we should look at the conflict which is going on in the east of Congo in the context of what's going on in Rwanda, right? Right. So that's what's going on in Rwanda and Congo. It is interrelated. The actions of Kagame are there to protect his people who live the east of Congo. It is directly related to the demonization of the Tutsis, which Sergei has mentioned today, right? Yes, you helped me. In the actual fact, we see attempts of one party to demonize the other party. If Kagame believes that all the Hutus that fled around have done genocide, they've been hunting Rwanda, who were the clearly this is unjustified, but still Rwanda is known by the fact that the courts have brought to court more than 2 million Rwandans, because basically more than 2 million fled the country in 1994. He believes that there were courts. I think that currently Rwanda is the country where most of the greatest share of the population is in jails. Well, long story short, he has said that the opposition is guilty of genocide. And when somebody says that this is not so, this is that is tarred as ignoring the genocide. This prevents from resolving the conflict in Rwanda and in Congo. Colleagues have mentioned Banyamulenge, but there were, Tatiana Bagdasarov has mentioned people that have been resettled by the Belgians into Congo because they needed a workforce. And they've been living there since the 1920s. And just like the Tutsis, they were the citizens of the Zaire. But during the war of the 1994, many Tutsis from Zaire supported RPF and came to Rwanda as conquerors. They received nothing, and then they went back. And then we saw the conflict.
Ну, деморализация, к сожалению, да, она имеет место быть.
Спасибо большое, Валенс. Теперь хотелось бы предоставить слово господину Мухинда, да, Мухинда Велерендижак, who is a lecturer at...
So now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Muhinda.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Слышите ли вы меня? Да, мы вас хорошо слышим, но я должна напомнить, что у нас есть временные ограничения. Тем не менее, нам очень интересно вас послушать.
Wonderful, wonderful. I just wanted to say that I am a scholar from DRC, not from Rwanda, and I am a PhD student at the University of Nairobi. Yeah, yes. Now I'm based in Nairobi. And actually, I wanted to respond to the first question. Thank you for inviting me in this particular session. And thank you for this wonderful discussion. But I wanted to say regarding the first question that the conflict, the current conflict in Eastern DRC, it's a conflict between a regime in Rwanda and the DRC government. It's not an ethnic conflict. It has nothing to do with the Rwandophones, the Tutsi, or the Banyamulenge, because in reality, the M23, for example, has nothing to do with the Banyamulenge, has nothing to do with the Rwandophones in North Kivu. Why? Because they do not have, currently, they do not have a problem with the Congolese or with the Congolese government. I've not heard of the government of Congo attacking Rwandophone communities or the Banyamulenge. No, it has not happened, at least very recently. But the reality is that the M23 is a creation of the regime in Rwanda that has specific foreign policy purposes. And the regime knows today that for it to be stable, for it to continue to be legitimate, it has to create that fictional enemy in Eastern DRC and to show that there is a permanent threat in Eastern DRC. And in that particular context, the regime fuels the conflict. But in reality, there is nothing ethnic in that particular conflict. For example, the Rwandophone communities in Eastern DRC are among the communities that are the most represented in the Congolese army, and they occupy bigger portions of land in the Masisi and the Walikale territories in North Kivu. They are in the parliaments, they are in almost all the institutions, and they are more represented by than many other ethnic groups in the same province, yet they are the minority, not the majority, which means that they do not clearly have current revendication that could explain an ethnic conflict. However, Rwanda knows very well that if the regime in Kinshasa, the government in Kinshasa, has control over resources, mineral resources, has control over lands, and has control over the border, has control over the national park of the Virunga, then Rwanda will lose resources because Rwanda takes advantage of the resources that are illegally exploited in the eastern part of DRC and processed in Rwanda. Rwanda knows very well that for the tourism industry to continue to prosper and for people to continue to come visit the gorillas, for example, in Rwanda, the national park of the Virunga in Eastern DRC has to be unstable, because if one day the national park of the Virunga is stable and the gorilla that fled to Rwanda go back to DRC, then no one will be willing to pay $1,500 to visit the gorillas in Rwanda when they know that they can pay $200 to visit the same gorilla on the other side of the border. So there are so many aspects of this particular conflict, but in reality, it's not a conflict between ethnic communities. It's a conflict between a regime which uses it as a foreign policy mechanism, either to control internal policy, to create a fictional enemy, and to continue to explain to the people in Rwanda that there is an enemy. We can link this particular conflict to genocide. We can link this particular conflict to history. But in reality, there is no historical connection between what's happening now and the situation in general in the Great Lakes region. And I do consider that the main triggers of this particular conflict is the evolution of the situation in DRC vis-a-vis the evolution of the situation in Rwanda. In reality, Rwanda does not want a government in DRC that has control over the resources in Kivu, that has control over the border, that has control over the land, that has control over the national park of the Virunga. Whenever Rwanda, the government, not Rwanda, the state or the population, Rwanda, the regime, whenever Kagame realizes that, oh, this regime is trying to control the resources, this regime is trying to control the border, this regime is trying to put some order in things, then they create another version of M23 with various ramifications. And in reality, M23 is an empty tool without the Rwandan army. Today, if you check the statistics, you realize that the majority of what is called M23 is actually the Rwandan army, which means that even the M23 as a rebellion is not as big as you think it is without Rwanda. That's my point of view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahinda. And it actually contradicts some of the theses that were highlighted today, because you say that, yes, the problem is that there are two governments, two regimes of the DRC and in Rwanda, the conflict. And here you say that Rwanda is interested in creating this artificial image of enemies for controlling their borders. We also have Mr. Edgar Tabaro with us. So tell us, please, what do you think about this? Is it true that for Rwanda's regime, it is necessary to have some kind of external enemy, and this is they do it just to control resources and lands?
Yeah, I'm Edgar Tabaro, based in the Republic of Uganda. I'm both a lawyer and a scholar on matters to do with the Great Lakes region, and I've published a number of papers. Am I audible? Okay, thank you. I've followed all the discussions, and I would like to agree partly with a scholar from the DRC based in Nairobi, that this conflict is basically a conflict between not even two states, but two heads of state, President Tshisekedi and President Kagame. You shall recall that the two heads of state were very close, and they warmed up to another. President Kagame did attend the funeral of the late Etienne Tshisekedi, former prime minister and father to the sitting president in Kinshasa. President Tshisekedi did admit Rwandan forces through a bilateral agreement to gain entry in South Kivu, to flush out elements who were deemed negative to the government or the state of Rwanda. Now, over the time, they fell out, and the reason for the fallout is that the Republic of Rwanda relies heavily on the natural resources of the DRC to balance its budget or to sustain its budgetary provisions. After the COVID lockdown and the closure of the border between Rwanda and unilateral closure of the border between Uganda and Rwanda, the Rwandan economy suffered immensely and needed a Marshall Plan to recover. So it turned to the DRC resources and found a president who was unwilling to cooperate in promoting that leb serum, or what I would call a predatory economy, Rwanda relying on the resources of the DRC. Now, I've heard over many speakers, indeed even on this occasion, limiting the conflict to the Tutsis in the DRC. I think that is disingenuous. And I've heard on many occasions scholars and persons in your spaces referring to the Banyamulenge. Now, this is not true at all. Banyamulenge are very much represented in the government in Kinshasa. I can name very easily 3, 4, 5 generals in the DRC FALDC who are Banyamulenge. There's Masunzu, there's Makanika, there's Tawimbi, there's Bisengimana, all at the rank of general and serving in the administration in Kinshasa. You shall recall in the aftermath of the Ntaganda, General Ntaganda, General Nkunda rebellion, and the signature of the agreement that integrated them into the FARDC, there was introduced a program of mixage, that persons who had served in that rebellion be deployed outside of their areas of birth And that meant that the rebels would be integrated in FARDC and deployed outside of those areas. Now, M23 are a recurrent group that refused to be integrated and redeployed elsewhere. They preferred to remain in their locality. And that's the reason why the agreement of March the 23rd collapsed, because they did not want to be integrated. A group of refugees relocated to Rwanda and another group relocated to Uganda. And those are the ones who are causing the latest flare-up in instability. Now, the scholar from the DRC did mention that Rwanda forms are indeed represented in Kinshasa. Yes, there is a minister for public works, Muvunyi Gisaro Alexis. He's a Nyamulenge from the RCD Goma group. RCD Goma members have been serving. One of them has been serving as president of the National Electric Corporation, National Electric Company in Kinshasa. Now, the other aspect is that we tend to limit the conflict in the DRC, or the flare-up in armed violence in the DRC, to only Rwanda forms. There are much bigger conflicts involving Mai groups, both in South Kivu and North Kivu. There is a conflict, an ethnic conflict between the Lendu and the Hama in Ituri province. It has taken in so much of violence, so much of displacements, so much of death. That is the area that is much closer to the Uganda border. In relation to the Rwanda forms generally, the people discussants tend to concentrate on Tutsi Rwanda forms. Non-Tutsi Rwanda forms, the Hutus in that area, also do face similar existential threats. But these existential threats are over, the conflict of those existential threats are over access to land, tenureship, and land use. Now, in that part of the country, they still use traditional chiefs. They still use traditional leaders, hereditary leaders, to run the administrations alongside the modern state, what you'd call the governors, the leaders of the territories. Now, they are chiefdoms that are led by hereditary leaders. Now, hereditary leaders determine access to land. Now, when it comes to the Rwanda forms, there are those Rwanda forms who are native to the DRC. Somebody talked about the German East Africa, King Leopold's influence and drawing of the boundaries in 1888 at the Berlin Conference. Now, there are those persons who are native to that place, who were incorporated in the DRC as Congolese. But there are also later-day immigrants who came seeking job opportunities in the plantations and mines. Now, because these persons came to work in the plantations and mines, they easily had income, disposable income, to purchase land. Now, the natives did not have the capacity to purchase titled land, and that brought about a conflict between the immigrant Rwandans and the natives who are not necessarily Rwanda funds. Further, there were 3 series of violence or refugees who came into the DRC.
So I'm very sorry, but I have to interrupt you. So to give everyone a chance to speak out, but we will get back to this topic once again. It's very interesting to listen to you, given that Rwanda phones have a lot of lands in the DRC, especially in the eastern part of the DRC, but it is just historically based because they had money to buy these lands. But anyway, it's very interesting to listen to you that M23 is an absolutely independent group that completely supported by Rwanda army, and they have Rwanda military men. And I would like to give the floor to our other colleagues to give their comments on that, and especially about the presence of our players in the region, because we only focused on relations between Congo and Rwanda. I have to say that in 2021, we discussed very intensively in the Congolese Congolese legislation that suggested that access to governmental positions will be limited if you are not a Congolese, if you are not a ethnical Congolese. And Mr. Tabaro mentioned these personalities. Probably they would stay on their positions if they were of different origin. And what's even more important is that this legislation generated a very big wave of hatred and violence to Tutsi in the public space. But at the same time, there were other political actors like a Catholic Church that was against this legislation. And so it stopped actually, but it doesn't mean that it will not appear again, because these issues about nationalities who live in the Eastern DRC, this we don't know how to call them correctly. Let's call them Rwandaphone, the people who speak Rwandese. So this question is still open. But anyway, let's speak about other things, and maybe other participants of our today's analysis have their opinion about, let's say, external actors. So I will be more talking about economical factors. So colleagues, we remember from the time of the first African war, second Congolese war, that a lot of attention is paid to mineral resources. And our colleagues made an event analysis of the intensity in the region and the price dynamics on coltan. So I would say that this problem, on one hand, is getting even more acute and is aggravating. So we have three teens: tin, columbite tantalite, tin, and tungsten, wolfram, and gold, of course. So this problem is getting even more serious because green metals, so we are talking about energy transition, so vanadium, lithium, cobalt, etc. They are used for batteries production. So at the same time, so as for cobalt, 50% of reserves of cobalt are in Congo, in Madagascar, and Morocco, and 70% of production. But on the other hand, still there is a question of about weapons production and equipment production for the next years. So it's still about very critical aspects. And of course, there is a question of competition between the US and China. And still we are talking about minerals and metals that are used for semiconductors. So why is this problem aggravating? So obviously it has deepened. So we need more metal. And the problem got aggravated, and we spoke about this with Maxim Andreevich. So this is what we are called new bipolarity. So one of the way out to deal with illegal production is certification that we see OECD is trying to integrate, but we understand that certification is very difficult, and it means that we need to take samples from different production sites and understand where minerals come from. And in recent years, we see that coal producers, they secularized these schemes. They started to use them. So we do have these samples to introduce sanctions against Russia. So they use these samples for other reasons, not the way they were meant to be used. So it's a crisis of the global management. So you will get your sample. So 14 German companies were creating this certification program. So you will hand over this information, but who is the interested party in getting these samples? So I read some literature on mineral resources, and we see that the situation is like at the former Cold War. And previously it was called non-communist deposits. So those minerals that communist countries can't take over. Now I mention a word, and I'm pretty serious, non-Chinese mineral deposits. So these minerals that are not used in Chinese chains, elevated chains. And we see that kind of decoupling, and the main cluster is for microelectronics. It's all about Southeast Asia. It's almost 80% of production, and Americans under the Biden administration refused the idea to decouple participants of this cluster. The Japanese or Koreans will not supply these to China because they have very strong cooperation, and they made a cluster in the US territory, and it leads to the situation that we have separate, distinct supply chains. And it's also about lobbying, and supply chains get refocused from Zambia, from Zimbabwe, from DRC. So they should go to the West over the Atlantic Ocean, not to East, to Asia. So it's like a geographical decoupling. So we have one cluster, South Asian cluster, and we have American cluster. And at the end, I have to say that, of course, everything is related to the governmental crisis. Weak state, and it started from 1980s, late 1980s, but now we have examples, and Oleg mentioned this, that there is certain support from Russia, but as for Kigali, it's one again about finding the right way of support, and we have opportunities to build conditions when states will take over their territories. So we need strong leaders in Africa, and I think that Africans will like this idea. And that's it from my side. Thank you. Thank you very much, Denis. It was very interesting to listen to your position. As for supply chains, when it comes to supply chains, how they get refocused on the geographical level. So non-Chinese minerals is another term that we see right now. So now I would like to give the floor to Vsevolod Sviridov from the Higher School of Economics. So Vsevolod just returned from the African Great Lakes region. So you were at the Rwanda territory, yes, but I will give you not a Rwanda glance, but a different one. I would like to join Mr. Muhindo, that Muhindo mentioned conflict between regimes, not between ethnics, but I have to mention Mr. Goncharenko, who wrote a book that nationality cannot be like ethnos, cannot be a real threat to anyone to land or to mineral resources. So I just don't want to get it too easy that it's all about conflict between Tutsi and other ethnos. And we know that a lot of leaders were again against Tutsi genocide. And we know that other African countries consist of different ethnic groups, and So I think that Rwanda and Congo are interested in preserving this very fragile balance between them. And I can tell you, because I spent a month in Rwanda, there is a transit that gives Rwanda $1 billion per year. But actually, Rwanda doesn't have any tools to control these routes. And if they are trying to apply force, the economic model will be destroyed and people learn how to live there. But still, if they escalate, it will not be very good, and they are actually really afraid. I mean, East African community, that there will be a military conflict. So Burundi, Uganda, and other countries, I think that the situation in the African Great Lakes region will continue to be very intense. And some leaders will resign, and Kagame will resign very soon as well. And of course, we need to mention external factor. We cannot forget that one of the triggers that triggered a very high emotional response from Kigali was a State Department statement about the Congolese position. And Kigali reacted very emotionally. He even sent several troops to Kagame, so there were no military conflict, but it was like very nervous. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sevalot. I would like to comment. So I was observing the situation in terms of statements that were made in regards to African Great Lakes region, especially from the State Department. And it seems to me that it was just made just to delude people, because just recently, 2 weeks before this conflict, there were manifestations with the Americans. They wanted to dismantle embassies and so on and so forth in the DRC. And it seems to me that it was just made to calm down everyone, to mitigate the conflict. And maybe it was like a gesture of gratitude to Congolese, but maybe I'm wrong, and we can comment on that. And we proceed to the third question. What is the likelihood that the conflict will escalate into a major African war? Do you believe that parties are not interested in the war because there is a balance of powers in this system, in this region, and what is happening right now is just a way to control appetites of the countries? So I will be very concise. So I just would like to comment what has been said before. So the biggest expert of Uganda, Burundi, is gold, and all this gold is actually exported from the DRC. So it's like an economical topic. Another thing, but I'm not very strong in economy, you can correct me. The exploration on the eastern DRC is made by Chinese companies. So, and China doesn't really care who physically, politically, or military will control this area, this region. If we imagine, that Rwanda will take control over this area and it will be a part of Rwanda, China will not care, absolutely, because the most important thing for them is to get this gold to China. So I think that we need to speak about these problems separately. And fact number 3 is, in terms of financial support, economical support, the biggest donator is the United States, because last year Rwanda got in total 1/3 of their budget from the United States. And how this money is spent is the main question that no one will actually answer. And I would like to end up my report by saying a few words that is there a likelihood that the conflict will escalate into a major war? There is only one likelihood. If there will be no money, there will be no conflict. If there will be money, there will be conflict. So everything relates on the economy, and war is all about economy. If there will be no money for army, for weapons, for vehicles, you can't actually achieve a lot with just bows and arrows. We understand that. We need some high technology weapons. So until the conflict will persist until we have money. And if money is over, the conflict will stop. We could see it in Mozambique. Why the conflict with Ugadagu persists? Because Al-Shabaab group, it's not a Somali group. They are from a different country, so they took over the main drug trafficking route. So they control this route. And you can imagine how much money they can earn from drug trafficking. And with this money, Al-Shabaab, Mozambique, has enough money for drones, for light artillery. And it's like this. If there will be money, there will be war. If there will be big money, there will be big war. So very pessimistic, but very realistic. Okay. It's still a question about aging Museveni and Kagame. So yes, it was very interesting to listen to your comments. I have a question. So you say that Rwanda government with the US support, some people say that it's a proxy country from the US or the UK, and they are very active in the eastern DRC. And the main resources from there go to China. It means that the US are helping the regime that provides minerals to China. I just want to make it clear. It's not like this actually. So the point is, my first education is about US policy. So I have US policy background. So in America, there is no strategic thinking. So maybe they're good in tactics, but when it comes to the long-term play and calculations, why it should be like this and not like that, it's not very common to the US. They will help anyone who will give them quick wins. So that's why they will continue supporting Rwanda, because it just gets them some quick wins. If in the long term it will help China, well, they do not care really about this. Thank you very much. So yes, very briefly now, then I would like to give the floor to those colleagues who didn't say a word. So just want to clarify, when we're talking about mineral resources of the Eastern DRC and the prospects, we need to divide it into two regions, cobalt and Cabinda. And these are different transit routes. They don't have anything in common with Rwanda. They go through different regions, and what is being produced in the Eastern DRC, these are very small sites. And it's not economically reasonable for big companies to work in these regions. So they just buy these minerals and then they just re-export it to India, to the United Arab Emirates. And then this just transit doesn't always go to China and to communist China, and it can go to other regions. So everything that is being extracted and produced in Kivu, they can be found elsewhere. Thank you very much. Very briefly, if you don't mind. So very briefly, I completely agree what Dennis said, that it's all about economy, because economy is the foundation for everything. It's about survival. So now we have a problem. And the problem is that Congolese resources is about $3.5 trillion. It's like a GDP of the United States. So what people say about historical background, 23 million Congolese were killed just because they were different people. And I agree with you that the United States, they just think about lobbying, but the point is the conflict started to expand, and the likelihood that the conflict will escalate depends on what kind of support they will get. So strategically, these countries are very important. And until Africans manage to settle these conflicts on their own, there will be still a likelihood that the conflict will escalate. And there are a lot of external factors and groups and many external actors who can get into. So thank you very much. I think that we all agree that for African states, the main question, one of the main questions is sovereignty and how to make it even stronger. And in order to achieve this, they need to control their resources. Mr. Mohara, can you give us your opinion? And we can switch to point number 3. Do you think that this conflict will escalate into a big African war? And if yes, who will be the parties of this
Thank
war?
you so much, Maya. Before I get maybe to your questions, I'd like to respond to the economic issues. I know most of the time when we want to speak about the economic issues, we like to say USA and China, but in my opinion, they are really not the key players. In my opinion, they are the regional states who are the key players because, for example, Tshisekedi signed a contract with Uganda, Dot Services. It's a company which is linked to the it's thought to be linked to the first family. And this company is the one that is supposed to first build the road to connect DRC with Uganda, but also it has a 70% key stake in the mines that will process gold, titanium, and tungsten. The second is the one he signed with Rwanda, the DITA Limited, and that is also linked to Rwanda military. So, and most of the gold that is even mined, that is sold from this country, by that I mean Uganda and Rwanda, that is believed to to come from DRC. It's mainly sold in UAE, not even China. So I think that has also to be looked instead of making the assumption. Mine is to speak on the political issues and to understand whether it could get into a regional conflict or not. But I'd like to speak partly on the background. In my opinion, the heads of states of DRC are the key problem, mainly in two ways. One, in interfering in regional states' issues, but also in seeking help from the regional states. So if we go back to, for example, Mobutu participated in Uganda's issue because the pro-Idi Amin soldiers were trained in DRC, and also he had an agreement with Sudan to destabilize Uganda. So by the time Museveni was getting to power, he didn't want any relations with Mobutu. On the other end, on the side of Angola, we know once MPLA came to power, he really also participated in destabilizing Uganda. So the ouster of Mobutu was a regional consensus. So Uganda, Angola, Rwanda, Burundi, all had a consensus to get him out, and that's what happened. For Rwanda and Burundi mainly was for them to create buffer zones for their security. So that is why the ouster of Mobutu maybe was successful, because all the regional countries were in consensus. Now, when it came to Kabila, who these countries thought they were the ones who put him in power, so they thought they had a stake in DRC's government, including the resources. But then, of course, once Kabila got into power, maybe he was not able to satisfy the needs of all the neighbors. In as much as all Rwanda, Uganda, and Angola, they met and they were already discussing how to get rid of him. Unfortunately, by the time Rwanda decided to have the march to get rid of Kabila, Angola was not on its side. So already you could see the first time all countries had consensus, but now it was just Rwanda and Uganda. So Rwanda and Uganda were the ones who were out to get rid of Kabila. Now, if we get back now to this Tshisekedi issue, so it's already divided. We have Angola on the other side, which was not in consensus with Uganda and Rwanda. Now, when it came to Tshisekedi, the problem which I've spoken about is about the two contracts which he gave these countries, Uganda and Rwanda. But now Uganda's contract is still valid, but Rwanda's contract was discontinued. So what has happened is, as Sergio said the first time, there's a deliberate attempt to demonize Rwanda. I'm not saying that they're justified, but all regional states, if Uganda will feel they're not, their needs are not satisfied, they will have issues. So at the moment, it seems the Rwanda issue is being projected more because they're the ones who are dissatisfied with whatever agreements are. On the other side, if Angola will also not be satisfied, they will also bring issues in Rwanda. So in terms of it, either the getting into a regional conflict or not, it will depend who is on whose camp. So there's a possibility of that. And also the DRC state is different from all the conflicts we have in Africa, because if you look at Somali conflict, there are warlords. Sierra Leone, there were warlords. In Angola, there are warlords. But in DRC, there are no warlords. It's just states. So it's the states who are key players. So if the states, even without DRC, have a consensus on what they're supposed to do in DRC, then either there will be peace or conflict. But also, as Sergei says, as long as the payoffs are more than the cost of the conflicts will continue. So that's all for now.
Спасибо большое, доктор Клэр. Видите, как все...
Thank you very much, Dr. Claire. You see that a lot of depends on political will of particular people, particular leaders and states at this moment. But if this will be that the conflict will be escalated, do you colleagues believe that it can become a big African war? Maxim Andreevich, what do you think? What can happen? What's the technical background of different parties of the conflict? What potential consequences can be humanitarian and political? It's a question to you and to Mr. Kiezo. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. A lot has been said about serious political things. I would like to deepen and attract your attention to the technical aspects related to military forces of the countries in the region and armed groups. So when colleagues discussed this matter, is there a likelihood that the conflict will escalate, and they mentioned a system that was formed among the states, I have to say that there will be no serious conflict, because any more significant impact on DRC can destroy the DRC. I mean the military forces of the DRC, if we compare them with Rwanda and Uganda, the situation will be very bad, very pitiful. I would like to pay attention to Uganda, because Uganda spends a lot of money on their security policy. And the example is that Uganda is the only African country that has Russian T-90 tanks, and only Algeria has such tanks, and also they have decent aviation compared to other countries. The DRC army just uses weapons that were used in other conflicts. And we can remember Mobutu's words, who said, why to pay to soldiers if they have weapons? And he believed that if a soldier has a weapon, it will find money for living. And basically, that's a very brief description of what DRC's army looks like. So yes, they have brigades that are controlled by the president. Everything is okay with money and with support, but the rest of the army are so-called integrated brigades. So it's composed of former Zaire army and other groups that were fighting at the eastern part of the DRC. So there are armies that consist of Tutsi, Hutu, and those who control these brigades, they are not traditional army officers. They are, as warlords, as Claire said, they have some responsibilities, liabilities before the DRC government, but also they have their own interests. And here we realized what was going on in the Central Africa before Russia stepped in. So yes, DRC have their army, but we can't say that they ensure their sovereignty. Another problem is that DRC understands it, so that's why they stake on military groups that were legalized in 2022. It's patriot groups, and their participants call themselves patriots. They said Kozalanda. There are 40,000 of them. And it's just a mixture of former militiamen or rebels, and they have weapons, and this is who ensures security in the country. So the question is, if the conflict is over, who will control them afterwards? Because they have weapons in their hands. And here, if we are talking about weapons and about M23 group, the conflict resembles a low-intensity conflict, as Americans call them. So DRC bought 8 Chinese drones that can make some bombardments, but they don't have a decent aviation to make larger bombardments. So we're talking about light weapons, and it's like very standard guns, machine guns, and mortars up to 100 millimeters. So they are not going to use any serials weapons. And I'm pretty sure that there will be no heavy weaponry in the conflict. M23 started to shoot down a drone from the humanitarian mission of the UN, and the conclusion is that the missile was launched from Type 92 Chinese armed vehicle, and the only country in the region that has these armed vehicles is Burundi. So mass media and everyone blames Rwanda, but I don't believe that Rwanda is the only country to blame, because if we take a look at the weapons, we will see projectiles from Bulgaria and from other African countries. And also we can see that DRC are buying their weapons and armor from different countries and they supply it to M23, for example. So what I'm talking about, if we need to find a political will, and DRC will have to demobilize a vast amount of people, but what should we do with these armed groups? How will they collect weapons? What kind of alternative will they give to these people? And they need to create armed forces that will ensure sovereignty of the state and not just deal with robbery of their own population. So I think that's it from my side. Thank you, Maxime. So it looks that the party are interested in this low intensity conflict. Aleka wanted to ask a question. Colleagues, since we are talking about a major war, so my question is, if we imagine, and I agree with my colleagues, there is a term, stability of the conflict, and this conflict is now more or less stable, and probably it will not escalate into a big war. But if we imagine that there is a big war, like it happened in 1990s, Congolese, everyone against everyone, a lot of countries involved. So how much attention will this war attract from external actors of the US, of the EU, of China, or it will just melt as it happened in 1990s? Can I ask you to answer this question? Maybe we can formulate it in the following way: how this war can be interesting, how it can attract other players or actors outside of the region. Well, I don't believe it will attract them. And before answering this question, we are talking about escalating the conflict into a big war. But what is a big war? A war with millions of people killed. 6 million people, I believe. Is it a big war for you? Yes, I believe that this is already a big war. And this is what happened, we know. But we're talking about escalating this conflict into other territories, other states. But I'm not sure this is going to happen. Because there was a war, but it didn't actually attract the Western countries, and it's not likely to happen in the future. Maybe this war will escalate and will expand to the neighboring Congo, for example. This issue is being discussed, of course. So once again, 6 million people already died, and no one cared. So going back to your question, and if you don't mind, I would like to give you some background. So a lot has been said, and there are certain things that I would like to highlight. First is the ethnicity character of the conflict. I don't think that it's an inter-ethnic conflict. I don't think it's a big thing. And you remember the bills and legislation that were proposed by the government, and other countries show this as well. We can take an example from Congo or from other African regions. Mali mentioned this, Sudan was mentioned. So these are real things, real means, if I can say like this, for politicians. So sometimes we just can't avoid such things. We need to have a certain political will. Going back to DRC, and I support Denis Andreevich, because any war is all about economy. The more chaos there is, the more beneficial the war will be. Another 6 million or 10 million will be killed, and it doesn't mean anything to the external actors. And this is being said at the United Nations. There will be a very big UN report that will mention this. And we know what companies are there in the region and what they are extracting, what they are producing, and what their interests are. So economy will define the way this conflict will escalate or not. So economy will define everything. So the going back to your final question, whether there will be a big African war, no, I don't believe there will be a big African war. It will be a local war, like, and I don't believe it will go to the neighboring countries. That is, thank you. Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes only, dear colleagues. Just 1 minute if you do have something to say, if you would like to answer this question. We have people, Alexei Demidov, like James Jacob Paul, who didn't say anything yet. Of course, we will give you the floor in the second part of our situational analysis, but still, please, over to you. Colleagues, I think that this is a very cynical question and maybe not very correct, because second Congolese war, 6 million or 10 million people died, and the question is about mass media coverage. And if you ask anyone in Russia, how many people do you think died in this war, people will say several thousands. So yes, we lack information, and there is no interest towards Russia. As for other interests and Africans' interests, so this is what we mentioned. Africans have they have to produce and to process minerals on their territories, and this will help to tackle the issue that Oleg mentioned, because otherwise Americans will not have access to deposits, because there will be only China. And if Africans start to produce everything on their own, if they process everything on their own, the United States will not have access to it. I would like to give you an example that out of all African regional organizations, the most advanced one is Southern African Development Community, that carried out a very intense work to have this in place. So other countries didn't take raw materials out of African countries. So what if we group together? What if we embrace together? And what if we even ban the selling of raw materials? And they got a grant for it, and unfortunately they didn't want to disclose the name of the donator. So some people think it's China, maybe it's even Germany. So Africans are ready for this, but still they need to get some support. Of course, it's easy to say, but we need to support these local initiatives on the minerals processing. Maybe someone from Zoom very quickly wants to say something. No? Okay, let me say. So war is a terrible thing, and war is a topic of mass media. And only 5 or 6 media corporations define the global agenda, like CNN and Reuters, and they're part of these 5 corporations, and they're all based in the United States. If these corporations will cover this conflict, so yes, media resources will be allocated, and no one can definitely say whether they will be interested in covering this conflict. Like, you know how many journalists were there in Rwanda covering the conflict? Those journalists or freelancers who were covering the conflict at the same time in the South African elections, there are more than 3,000 journalists, but in Rwanda they were just dozens. whether the conflict will be covered by mass media, even if there will be a big war, no one can tell you exactly, because the focus is all about media coverage and advisors' interests. So final question, not final question, but final words to Claire, and then we will have a coffee break. We have certain limits and we have to stay without this element. So 1 minute only.
Thank you so much. I would like to answer the question about the military intervention. Yeah. First, we have to understand there's no military intervention that will solve this crisis. The problem is not about military intervention, but then of course states could intervene, especially on the eastern side. In as much as it's Congo, I think the main states which are involved in this conflict are Uganda and Rwanda. So if a state wants to intervene, it has to choose sides, either Uganda or Rwanda, because at the moment they are not on the same side. But then also the interest has to be understood, because to say that the interest is to solve the crisis militarily, it's not true. Of course, they could use that as way to get entry into the conflict, but the main issue has to be the resources. But then also the duration of the conflict or the war will only last as long as there's the resources. As long as the payoffs are higher than the cost of the military intervention, then of course the war will be extended. So first, one has to understand at the moment what are the benefits. If the current conflict is beneficial to both Uganda and Rwanda, then there will be no ceasefire. And if there will be ceasefire, then these two states have to understand whatever they have at the moment will still be guaranteed. When it's not guaranteed, there'll be conflict. And that's why when the colleague Jack was saying that about Rwanda, it's just about access of whatever resources that they have. At the moment, Uganda is not being mentioned much, but there are also these two states are the key states in that region that need to be consulted. So of course the intervention could be there, but it will not be to solve the crisis. So if any state gets there, they have to understand why they are going. So you look at the financial benefits, then you have to choose sides, either Uganda or Rwanda. In as much as it's DRC, I don't think the state of DRC has so much say in that. So that's my.
Thank you very much, Dr. Claire. So I have a question of Oleg Nikolaevich. So I think that the Western countries' attention will be there given the scope of the war. I don't believe that the war will be big, but if there will be a big war, so big that it will not allow mining companies to run, there will be certainly military interventions, and then Western countries will pay their attention to this region, because there are a lot of Western countries in this region. And of course, if this big war will not allow Western countries to produce, they will show their attention. So of course we can speak about this more, but we don't have much time. Thank you, Tatiana. Can I just one sentence? So there was a big war in 2 years, and in China, for example, they also have a lot of minerals, and they extract these minerals, and the situation is very similar, but no one paid attention to this. And any war is not beneficial to Russia, because any war will just make our partners weaker. Absolutely agree with your last sentence. This is what I was supposed to say, and I thank you very much for your opinions. I think that our discussion, as it always happens, went not according to the plan, but nonetheless, we are going to have a coffee break. The colleagues who joined us online in Zoom, Kiki, Valens, Jacques Mohindo. We are hoping to see you again at 12:20 p.m. Moscow time. We will provide you with specific recommendations. Our next part will be more concise, shorter. And those colleagues who didn't have a chance to speak up, we welcome you. So thank you very much, and we will see you in 20 minutes. Dear colleagues, we are back. So we are joined by Jacobs Paul from Tanzania. He's a Tanzanian journalist and he is studying in the Plekhanov Academy. So, dear colleagues, I think that we had a very intense first part of our situational analysis, and the second part will be even more intense because we have less time. And I guess that we will give the floor to Alexei Demidov, who has very important aspects about the situation we are discussing right now. I mean, the humanitarian aspect. And we didn't have a chance to speak about this in the first part, so we will link our session to the second set of questions. The second part is all about resolving the conflict. We need to build specific recommendations on how the conflict can be settled, what parties of the conflict should do. Ideally, of course, we would like to listen to our African friends, our African experts, because it's more about their countries. How do you see the participation of other external actors and how the ideal formula for Rwandan Congolese settlement look like, and what is the role of Russia in this conflict? So these are the most acute questions. I would ask you to be as much concise as possible, apart from Alexei, who will give us more detail about this, and then I will be more than happy to listen to your opinions. Alexei Demidov from the International Red Cross. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the organizer for giving me the floor and for interest towards this situation. It's very pleasant for me as I am from the Red Cross because humanitarian crisis in the DRC is a very good example of the forgotten crisis. So there are crises that are on the agenda that people talk about, and there are crises like in the DRC that people don't pay much attention. According to the UN, in 2024, more than 25 million people will need help. And it's like 1/4 of the population, which is pretty a lot. And I would like to be very concise and give you some idea about key humanitarian problems that countries face. So first, it's a lot of internally displaced people and consequences of this. Second, lackage of foods, of medical services, attacks on peaceful people, and military groups engagements. And of course, these aspects are interconnected. As for IDP, so there are 7 million of IDPs, and it's a very huge number, and this number is growing. And historically, there was never so many people. And these people are located in DRC, in Kivu, and a lot of people are in Goma city. So why displacing people is such a huge problem? So when people are forced to leave their homes, their houses, they are denied of everything. And in the DRC, the front line is changing. So that's why people are displaced several times, and every time they need to start everything from zero. Now they don't have any earns to fulfill their basic needs. So a lot of people are located in Goma city, as I said, and there are a lot of internally displaced people, and we just don't have enough food for all of these people. Another big problem is located to the people concentration. Services are overloaded in terms of food, water, healthcare. They are just not enough, and it's a problem not for internally displaced people, but for local communities as well. And of course, we can't ignore problems about sanitary conditions. There are cases of cholera registered in the country. So this can be aggravated as the conflict is getting escalated. The humanitarian crisis can become even bigger and become a humanitarian catastrophe. So other humanitarian problems are shortage of medical services, lack of medical services. So on front line, actually, healthcare system doesn't work because doctors fled with IDPs. There are no medicines, and hospitals become targets for attacks. And when there are some clashes or battles, medical services are very important, but the healthcare system in this regard is very vulnerable. So a lot of wounded people or injured people, they can survive because their injuries, their wounds are not very severe, but there is no one to help them. So the only way to rescue yourself, to save your life, is just to run away, which actually increases the number of IDPs. Other problems, lack of food security and attacks on residential areas of camps, sexual violence, engagement of children to the conflicts. And in fact, so when it comes to reaction to these problems, the Red Cross organization works in different regions, in big cities like Goma and in smaller places. When our delegates sometimes come on place and help people, and people say, so if you made this big path, it means that people still remember about us, and it's very good in terms of psychological relief for them. People realize that they are not forgotten, they are not abandoned. And at the end, I would like to highlight several humanitarian problems. So first is a lack of financing. According to the United Nations, humanitarian aid in the DRC was required in 2023 for over $2 billion, but only 70% was collected. So it's a crisis that is under-financed. Another problem is humanitarian access. So Red Cross has good relations with the parties of the conflict, so we don't have problems with the access, but the problem is not with the access. The problem is with the security and safety. Sometimes we can't come in place, or the road are so bad that we can't make it on place. Also, only 20% of IDPs are living in camps. The rest are hidden in enclaves, or they just hide in their relatives' their houses, and it's very difficult to reach them. So just an example, I talked to my colleague who worked there, and he told me that he needed to pass 100 kilometers with the convoy. So how much does it take? How long does it take you to pass 100 kilometers? And it took them 1 month to pass 100 kilometers, given the state of the roads and given the state of security. So that's the problem. Another problem is fast changing situation, because when people are displaced, when they change their positions, we need to change our operations, and we need to act differently. So that's it actually from my side, and I'm ready to take your questions. So I have a lot of information on this problem. So yes, it's not just a conflict of low intensity. When we say these words, it looks like that it's not something very serious. It's of very low intensity, some bombardments that don't actually really impact civilians, but for local people, it's a real war that is going on for several months. So that's why I would like to proceed with the question number 4 in your questionnaire. Who should play the leading role in the settlement of the conflict in the African Great Lakes region? So we were talking about different factors, different actors. So maybe we can also, as a follow-up, tackle the question number 6. What should the ideal formula for a Rwandan Congolese settlement look like? Maybe there are some legal ways to settle this conflict. Maybe can one party sue the other party? So Nikes, as a person with legal background, can give us a comment, please. So first of all, I would like to say that there are no problems with legal settlements because experience shows so I spent 1 hour of my day and I went to the International Criminal Court. I wanted to see what cases they consider. And practically there were cases when some parties were sued, someone were accused, some justified. So yes, legal settlement can be there, but first we need to consider the fighting parties. DRC, Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda. So you can make them sitting at the table of negotiations and make them agree. That's the first way. Other countries can help them or can intervene or can send their troops. But I can tell you that military intervention will not happen, will not help to settle the conflict. Even peacemakers from the UN cannot do it. So only peaceful negotiations can help in settling this conflict. So politicians from these countries, they need to sit at the table and negotiate. And this is the only way to find the way out. So that's my first idea about the legal settlement. Yes, they can actually sue. And the point is that International Criminal Court will consider a particular person, not a particular state. So yes, I can tell you that there is a legal. So there is no legal solution or military solution. There is only political solution. So I also believe and agree that legal solution is not a solution, because legal solution only possible when people believe in it. I think we need to take the Western format, the European format. They were dominating for 500 years. And their model is a culture-based model. World is changing, times are changing. We need to start thinking about changing ourselves as well. We need to use resources of our peoples. So that's why I don't believe in the legal solution. So the next question is how? historically, we need to remember that we're talking about legal countries, and they have different organizations or groupings. Maybe ECOWAS, Western community, Western African community can help. Also, African Union and BRICS, not the United Nations. UN didn't work in Mali or other countries. So it's like this. And then I would like to take one example. What happened in Rwanda? They used what they had historically. Like, if you come and you say, well, I didn't mean it, people will forgive this person. Another example from Senegal. So they become independent, and we had territories over the Senegal River. Our president decided to give up these territories. So Mbapile had access to water. Because we just couldn't deprive people from water. So there were conflicts with Mauritania, ethnic conflicts, but ethnic conflicts are everywhere. But the question is if I'm under threat, who will protect me? Only my people will protect me. So there was a serious conflict in Mauritania, but now they got oil and gas. And of course, we can have a war. And they said, no, that's okay. You can use the routes you need to transport your oil and gas. We can live together. And my mother in my childhood, or my grandmother told me, it's just an example that shows you how way of thinking can differ. Mothers told me that there was a grandmother, a granny that who was selling some things, and then another woman came to her and said, like, go away. And my grandmother went away, and my mother said, why? And because she needed that more, she had more needs. So that's the point. And I'm almost up. We have the Senegal River, Mali, Guinea, can be 4 of them. And it's not like who pays more has more. Sometimes people pay to give other people some places for living. It's just an example that exists. So it's just a different culture. It doesn't mean that it's better or worse. It's just different. Thank you very much for your examples, for what you said from a different part of Africa, and examples of your social and cultural systems. And the most important idea is to give the major role to the countries involved into the conflict, and without international participation, without international pressing, parties are not likely to actually agree. Maybe someone from Zoom wanted to say something about the situation. Captain Kiki, Valens Muhindo, Edgar Tabaro. I just don't see who wants to say. Oh, everyone wants to say something. Okay, we will start with Valens. Valens, but try to be very short. What is your solution? So I will try to be very concise. So first, I cannot agree with Diano about Rwanda example for Chacha, because for Rwanda's the Chacha, it's a very big problem, but nonetheless, I think that to settle the question in the East DRC, there are examples when Zaire, Rwanda, and Burundi cooperated inside the great African lakes community, and there were no conflicts, and everything was okay. And despite mercenaries, actually, the situation was, there were some mercenaries, and this situation could be destabilized. So now we need to get back to the structure to avoid such conflicts. It's one thing. The other thing is that there were attempts when the Democratic Republic of Congo joined the East African community, and maybe they didn't get what they expected. To settle this conflict is to make countries cooperate based on their mutual respect and based on their mutual interests. If they reach this, if the leaders of these countries will reach this, probably the conflict will go down. But first, we need to avoid situations when there are to avoid situations when we demonize certain ethnic groups, as it was highlighted by previous colleagues. So Tutsi in Congo is not an object of prosecution, but nonetheless, we see still that this problem exists, and that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Valens. So who else wants to say? I unfortunately cannot see. So can we switch to the next speaker? Jack Mahindo, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, actually, it's an interesting question, and I can say that from the historical perspective, all possible solutions have been tried to the conflict in the Eastern DRC. Peacekeeping missions, UN peacekeeping missions have failed. Regional peacekeeping missions have failed. Regional military interventions have failed. Cooperation between DRC and Rwanda has not been successful. And I remember in the case of Uganda, DRC introduced a case at the ICJ, and Uganda was asked to pay a huge amount of money in terms of reparation of the damages caused by the war and the military intervention of Uganda in DRC. But despite that, Uganda continued to support armed groups in Eastern DRC. It means that even the legal mechanisms are failing. Then my observation is this. There is no actual problem that can explain why we should be asking this country to continue negotiating. Why? Because the current situation is the result of previous negotiations. Because whenever DRC and Rwanda negotiate, then that agreement will be used to create another situation like the one we know. For example, there was a group created called RCD Goma. RCD became a big rebellious group supported by Rwanda. RCD negotiated with the government in Kinshasa. It became part of the government. Then after some years, those who are members of the RCD, they said, we were not satisfied with the way this negotiation was implemented. They created CNDP with Laurent Kunda Batware. Okay, there were negotiations. After those negotiations, some years back, they say, okay, we are not satisfied. Then they create M23. So if they negotiate today, 5 years later, they will come back and say, we are not satisfied with ABC. They create another group. You see, because even when you negotiate, it's impossible in the current context to apply every clause of the negotiation 100%, which means that even these negotiations are problematic. Another aspect to these negotiations have been used by external actors to infiltrate the Congolese army. For example, you create an M23 group, then you bring foreigners in that M23 group, you negotiate with the government in Kinshasa and you tell them, okay, for us to cease the war, you take all these combatants and they will be part of your army. So you don't care how they were trained, where they were trained, who trained them, where they came from. You cannot even check their citizenship. Okay, they are part of the army. But you know them because you are the one who gave them to the Congolese army, and you continue to control them. When you see that your interests are no longer protected, you manipulate the same people you put in the army, they create another rebellious group. So even these negotiations are not providing a sustainable solution in this particular context. So it's important maybe to think about another mechanism, but I personally think that in the case of DRC, as long as the government in Kinshasa will remain a weak government, as long as I will not have a strong state in Kinshasa, there will be a very big problem in the Great Lakes region. And this, the approach that was used so far, which was supported by Western countries so far, is that, okay, they don't want a very strong DRC state, because if it's very strong, then it falls, for example, under the influence of China or any other actor. This country will be strong enough to influence. It has like 9 neighbors already. So if it's strong enough to influence 9 neighbors, it means that these are 10 countries in the central region of Africa that will fall under the influence of a power that is not maybe in the influence of the other powers. So DRC has to remain somehow weak so that at least it cannot influence all the other countries in the region, and they have to create another powerful small nation, powerful enough to disturb, but not strong enough to influence all the other regions. So that's the approach that has been used in the solutions that have been applied so far from a strategic point of view. But I think this one is also not sustainable. I am of those who think that if we want to help, if we want to solve the problem, then we have to create a strong DRC state, a state which is sovereign, which can have control over the resources, which can have control over the territory. And now, when we have a strong state, it will be now important to negotiate with this state, because it will be strong enough to defend the interest and to understand how to facilitate and protect the interest of the other actors. If it's about access to resources, if it's a strong enough state, it will be easy to legally negotiate with this state and see how to have legal access to these particular resources. That's my point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Mohenda. Your position is quite clear. No regulation can be long-term, can be sustainable without a strong government, without a mechanism of effective governance inside Congo. And nobody of the Congo's neighbors is interested in this. Okay, next participant from Zoom, please. Captain, can you please connect Captain Keke?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, I think I'm having an issue with my video. But can you hear me now? All right. I'm going to tend to agree with what Jack just mentioned a moment ago. The Congolese problem is an African problem. It is encompassing the whole continent. You have a situation where, as we speak right now, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, a few months ago, even Kenya had troops in the Congo. All right, and you've got South African or SADC peace, and I believe it's a peace enforcement mission, but again, it's bound to fail. Why? Because first of all, militarily, what 18,000 MONUSCO peacekeepers tried to do, I don't think 8 to 10,000 or 8 to 9,000 African troops who are under-resourced are going to be able to achieve. It's an enforcement mission. I am not very confident that the SADC force is going to be able to take on basically the Rwandese army, because that is what the M23 is. The M23 are Rwanda army irregulars. That's basically what it is. You can tell from the equipment, from the kit, everything. It's straightforward. I mean, it's not a secret anymore. To resolve this issue is going to be a humongous African push or drive. All the southern or SADC states, including the AU, you want to bring in the East African community, you're going to have a conference specifically on the Great Lakes. And after that, to ensure for it to be effective, the Congolese state or government's got to be strong enough militarily, and strong enough to hold its own so that it's able to, can I say, prosecute any agreements that are going to come through. Without that, all you're going to have is continuous discussions, negotiations that will fail from one generation to another. Okay, and this problem isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to stay with us, right? And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think I see that we see a picture evolving here. Let us listen to Alexander Shapilov now, and then we'll go over to Claire, and maybe someone else. Yes, hello. To comment, yes, Alexander Shapilov wasn't on our list. It was added at the very last moment. But last but not least, he represents the Institute of General History, and he's been dealing with African studies. Yes, thank you very much. As regards the reasons of the conflict, the root causes of the conflict, yes, on the one hand, it's a very old conflict. What Tatiana Bagtazova and Denis have mentioned. The causes for a full-scale conflict arose in the 1990s for several reasons. One, the progress in institutional incapacity of Zaire back then, and then the DRC, but we touched upon this today. It is quite clear that there were also reasons that went back to the Belgian colonies and the special ways of Mobutu governance. Even in the context of relatively more stable other states, this is a great territory with a lot of resources. The political presence of the Congolese government is limited, even up till now, militarily. As for the resources we have discussed, Denis has mentioned that in the 1970s, on the one hand, it was the time where the global price for resources plummeted, which contributed to the institutional weakening of many governments around this region. So, transboundary economy evolved, and smuggling as well. On the other hand, the globalization has resulted in a situation where, when there's a weak government in Zaire, in Congo, the resources can be supplied directly to the global market, to major players. That is this interest in buying cotton and other mineral resources created this reason for new types of warlords. Laurent Desire Kabila has been engaged in this activity since the 1960s. It was more in Qatar, clearly, but still, some infrastructure solutions have been reached by that. But globalization and the global demand for these resources and establishing direct connections via neighboring states, Rwanda, but also other states, this all has resulted into the establishment of a situation which William Rina and others called the colonial conflict scheme. And the schemes for conflict support. This is what wasn't the case in the days of the Cold War. So this is the model of the conflict that has been regenerated ever since on the borders of the DRC. We have discussed external factors and regional factors here quite a lot. M23 and other movements. They are under the Rwandan control to a great extent. But here I would urge my colleagues not to underestimate the agency, the independence, the ability to influence the situation by individual warlords. Yeah, but, local rebels, local irregular groupings related to particular government, which quite complement quite often they complement each other. So we see a patchwork here. If we look at how the conflict regenerates, we'll see some local groups which depend on access to the global market and on the mediation from the local forces, but they also want to regenerate the conflict. It's the warlord to a lesser extent. And then others who are beneficiaries of this conflict, but also who are capable of of turning this war into luxurious business. So this is one of the key problems that prevents from regulating, from settling this conflict. Furthermore, it's the global market and the interests of the transnational corporations from the US, China, from France. In the 1990s, there were French companies involved there. And there are now other companies trying to enter this market as well. In any case, it's about buying resources at very cheap prices. This is something which keeps up the economy of the conflict, the economics of the conflict. And clearly, Rwanda and other East African countries can also earn their revenues from transit, from the supplies of weapons, from logistics. So, to be able to settle this conflict, really, all the questions have to be resolved at all the three levels. Clearly, what the Congolese government can do, it's not so much about pursuing a harsh policy. Clearly, they have to get a strong institutional capacity and military capacity. They need to train their armed forces better, fund their armed forces better, so that the Congolese military don't have to subsist by robbing the local population. So this can be made, this can be done. Furthermore, conditions have to be established where warlords would lose revenues from exports. And maybe they would get a proposal as part of the institutional dialogue. President Kabila tried doing this on several occasions. This wasn't quite successful so far, but quite often you cannot succeed at first attempt. So maybe these people should be offered a place in national policy, maybe access to resources by some sort of distribution. But clearly, Rwanda will be here against this settlement because they will lose access to these resources. And then international organizations such as the UN and regional organizations can also impose some sort of sanction. Back in the days, it's helped to settle the conflict in Liberia, for instance, but by regulating access to diamonds. But also certification mechanisms, which Dennis has mentioned. This will most probably take quite some time. It will take lots of years to implement, but most probably this resolution will take a lot of time. But still, but the president has been trying to do this. So we will have to go along all these lines. But so far, it's not quite optimistic, but it is doable. Thank you very much. Basically, you have drafted a whole plan to address this problem. I think it includes lots of very good, very constructive steps. But Claire, over to you first. So, yes, Dr. Claire, and then Sergey.
Thank you. On speaking about the solutions for DRC, first I'd like to agree with my colleagues when they said we need a strong DRC state. But I also think the problem in terms of even establishing DRC strong state or the means that is used is wrong, because, and this also might be the problem of the African Union, I mean the peace and security architecture, because they always state when there's a problem in one of the countries, then the regional organization should be the first to participate in the solutions. And anytime there will be either a regional organization, if it's ESC or now SADC, whenever they will intervene, they will need sort of to be paid for whatever it is that they will need. So this will mean any time that any head of state of DRC uses this, they will need to pay these states. And that was proved in terms of Kabila when Rwanda and Uganda were the ones who pushed him to eventually to be the president. They needed to be paid, and once that didn't happen, then they also took part in making sure to ouster him. So if Tshisekedi continues trying to ask EAC, after EAC asks SADC, maybe after that asks Angola, it is going to be a continuous problem. So in terms of trying to create a strong state, first of all is he shouldn't ask for help from states and then these countries feel that he is indebted to them. When this will continue, there will never be a strong DRC state. And this could also stem from AU. So the solution, in as much as it will need help, but it doesn't have to feel personal in the sense that a DRC will owe somebody for whatever it is that they will do. Secondly, we have to understand Burundi and Rwanda, maybe partly even DRC, they will continue having problems with DRC, not in as much as its resources, but not necessarily the minerals, because Burundi and DRC are very small countries, and of course, and they're very fertile. And if the projections are correct, the population is going to increase. Once this population increases, they will not be able to stay within their borders. So it means they will continually move out. So, so either there should be a regional understanding that these individuals within this state will continue moving within other countries, because other countries have an advantage. If you stay in a country and maybe the population increases, you can move within the country to other less populated areas. But Rwanda and Burundi will not have that, and maybe Uganda. And as the population increases, there is no way Rwanda can sustain 50 million or 100 million within the current area it has. So it means they will move to the neighboring countries. So these are issues that need to be understood, unless there will be policies either to curtail the population growth or have an understanding when the population will increase, then they could move to other countries within the region. Also to speak about the issue when he was speaking about Red Cross, the problem. Also the problem in DRC is the issue of infrastructure. So even as much as the strong state is being created, infrastructure has to be essential. So internal development is key. Without the internal development, there will be no solution in the country. So as Kiki said, there's no connection between Goma and Kinshasa. So there should be an interconnection within the whole country. As long as the country has, it's almost divided because there's no infrastructure connection, then other countries will take advantage and control the different regions. So at the moment in East, it's Rwanda and Uganda. So the main issue in terms of creating a strong state, it has to be whoever will be in charge in DRC. They have to take the initiative and put forward the key policies that will enable it to have a strong state. Thank you.
Спасибо, доктор Клэр. То есть получается...
Thank you, Dr. Clare. So for President Tshisekedi, it's the decisive moment where they can either win or lose, swim or sink. Either he succeeds in strengthening institutions in his state, then Congo can become a stronger or more serious player in this region and in Africa in general. Is that right?
I was, yeah. I was saying that this is actually kind of a watershed moment for Tshisekedi himself, where if he goes forward with all of his policies and institution building mechanisms and what we call capacity building, but in his very own Congolese way, then this may bring him forward and the Congolese state forward. So this is the point in time where this is a make or break moment.
Thank you. I don't think Tshisekedi will be able to do this, partly because he has already involved other countries in the problem. So already he owes this country. So he did with EAC. If it was maybe between our former head of state in Kenya, then I'm sure as either a family in their business or what, they will need an interest in DRC. He has to pay back. He has asked now for SADC, he will have to pay back. So I really don't think Tshisekedi is in a position to do that because
there's somebody else.
He has already gotten into agreements with the regional states, with Uganda and Rwanda. So he already gave them the contract. So I really don't think so. At the moment, the only solutions could be what has already been done. This is my own personal opinion. I really don't think Tshisekedi is able to.
Thank you, Dr. Clare. That's a very interesting opinion. So it looks like we're now waiting for a new political leader that would be able to unite Congo, that would be able to turn the Congo armed forces into something better, and would be able to control the eastern part of the country too. So now Sergey, and then the next speaker. The microphone, please. Please use the microphone. So many people underlined that we need a strong Congo state. This is not possible. This is not possible because the international architecture is now structured in a way that it is impossible. It is impossible to build a strong state in Africa currently. Like take Mali, for instance. They try to restore order in their territory, and they couldn't. It's a fact. It is impossible to build a strong state, either in Congo or in Kenya or in Tanzania. We went through it after the election. That's a fact. That's the global architecture, unfortunately. That's how it is. Well, our African experts are main Afro-pessimists or Afro-realists. Okay, Sergey. So maybe you should give us a beacon of hope. Well, I have this question. May I express my opinion on questions 4 and 6, and then build the bridge to question 5? You see, as the conflict settlement and the ideal formula for conflict settlement, the peace through through firepower. I may sound a bit cynical. So, in any conflict, when there's a party who's has a superior firepower, then a truce is possible. let's say you're waging a war in bows and arch, and then you all of seas and the armored personnel carrier and the helicopter. The conflict doesn't make any sense. We'll see lots of examples back in the 1990s in the conflict in Osh in Kyrgyzstan. That was put out by the Russian army, and the commander of the Division 101 said that we will kill anyone who would raise their arm. And the conflict came to an end. Or let's take a conflict in Namibia. Uh, 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 the people there ensured safety in South Angola and North Namibia by means which I would like to mention here, but they reached pacification there. Or, for instance, our mass media like to say that Russia has been able to bring law and order to the Central African Republic. Yes, on one hand, this is true, but on the other hand, nobody would like to find out how this was done. Well, it was very easy. The command, the order was spare no bullets. As soon as terrorists appeared, the Russians would come and would shoot all that moves, and the terrorists would be killed. Wagner Group had lots of successes, but they had many more failures there in some other countries. So my question number 5 is, should Russia interfere into conflicts? Diplomatically, yes. Militarily, no. Because Russia, getting back to my initial statement, doesn't have the superior firepower. So whenever there's an actor who is capable of showing everybody, the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, that in case of even a very small conflict aside, we will react tenfold, then probably, yes, all the parties would put down their arms and would sit at the negotiations table. But this must be an actor with lots of power and unbridled by anything, because neither UN forces nor any other forces, they're bound by lots of laws, regulations, and they cannot do anything here. So it must be a wild army that would flood everything with fire and bullets. And then people would think, okay, maybe start negotiating. Thank you for your opinion. But then the question is, who really needs this? We'll have a comment on Zoom. So we would like to hear your opinion as to what you think Russia can do this. Sergei said that Russia should, or at least may, offer a diplomatic solution. What do you think about it? Captain Kiki? Captain Kiki? Captain Kiki is not only a political analyst, but also captain of the Air Force.
Can you hear me? Okay. I will go back to, first of all, I'll deal with the current going-ons. I think Claire it was who mentioned about the SADC peacekeepers coming into the DRC or in the Great Lakes region, basically Eastern DRC, and their ability to resolve the issue. I pose that currently, those states put together do not have the military strength or ability to sort out the problem in the Congo. Why? They've been operating over the last decade with lots of military spending cuts, and basically the military abilities have been degraded. And in this case, I talk specifically about South Africa. Traditionally, we'd assume that South Africa is a military capable state, but she's in a difficult position right now. She doesn't have the budgets or the budgetary support to keep her Air Force and parts of her Air Force, including her gunships. There are not many gunships operational right now. I believe they're less than 20. And in the Congo, there are actually 3 or 4 pieces that have been sitting, not flying for over 2 years. So they're not really they're not serviceable. And they've got an aging force. And we've got a political leadership that is now using the military to take care of domestic security concerns. And that means that there are not very many South African troops available for external missions. Now, we're sending them into the Congo, not for a peacekeeping mission, these are peace enforcement mission. I don't really think they're at the stage where they're willing or capable to take part in an enforcement mission. And I think it needs to be very clear. At the same time, let's look at Tanzania. Tanzania is a very important cog in the goings-on in the Great Lakes. Many people don't understand it or see it. I do, and theirs is historical. The Tanzanians have actually sent an artillery detachment that's currently engaging the M23 as we speak. Or well, they were a few weeks ago. But again, it looked like it was all window dressing because Tanzania's got very deep investment, can I say, decisions that are taking place as we speak today. And many of them are intertwined with Rwanda as a country. So you can look at Tanzania and ask yourself a question, how is Tanzania investing? And you figure out that she's investing with an eye into the Congo. And as Kagame speaks today, Kagame will not ever really attack Tanzania. Why? Tanzania looks like Kagame's fallback. Kagame is actually insisting on accessing minerals from the DRC, but you now realize that Tanzania looks like it's going to be his value addition center, and the Tanzanians are playing ball. They've just finished their power demands. They've got I think the second or third largest hydroelectric project, a $3 billion project, the Julius Nyerere hydroelectric power project that's just coming on stream now. And one asks yourself, what does Tanzania need all that power for? But then when you realize that they're setting up value addition centers in Dodoma, Morogoro, Dar es Salaam, it then means that even the Tanzanian SGR has got a purpose and a function. It leads all the way to Western Tanzania, and then there are 2 splits. One goes to Kigali, and the other split is going into Burundi. So, and there's actually there's one line that's going to come from the Tanzanian side again into the. Everybody's focusing in the region is focusing quietly to Tanzania, and I would bet my last coin to, and say, have a look and watch out for Tanzania. And remember, Tanzania has a history of supporting pre-independence, can I say, pre-independence organizations in Africa, from Mozambique, South Africa itself, to Namibia, to Angola. All of them were hosted by Tanzania. She was the hosting ground for all those rebel movements. And at some stage, I feel she's stepping up to play a greater role, and we need to appreciate that. Thank you. That's my comment for now.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we haven't touched upon Tanzania. Maybe you would like to comment on this. Yes, indeed, there's an opinion that Tanzania has had this tradition of supporting rebel movements. And this may include Rwanda, although we didn't have any information about this. This is only what we hear from the field, so to say, from the people located out there. So how does your country look at the situation currently developing in the region of the Great Lakes?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I would like to appreciate all of you here for allowing us to be here. But second, I can say that I had a lot concern about what is going in Congo and some parts of Rwanda and Uganda. But in the side of Tanzania, I can say that our country is playing a big role to make sure that Africa is changing from being into multiple areas, especially in terms of civil war, in terms of poverty and other problems. But when we turn to the reality, the problem of Africa will be only removed by the Africans themselves. This means that if we will have something like good discussion, the discussion from the heart, not the discussion of the paper. You know, many of Africans, we do sit for the paper, not for the heart, not for the people of current and future generation. That's why many of countries from Africa do fail to reach their destination, the destination of development, the destination of peace, and the destination of having the good cooperation in all spheres of social, political, and economic. So in order for the African country to be in a good state of development or in any situation, there should be the good conversation from the heart. And this conversation must be done by the readers with the cooperation of the people who are working on the issue of making Africa to be a good center or a good continent in terms of human rights. But the second thing, I can say that in order to make Africa to be what we need to see, we as young generation, we must take a part to tell, if not to tell, but if not to tell, we must decide to make our continent to be in a good situation. For example, current, you can see a lot of people, I mean young generation, do hit their chest, prouding themselves of either speaking good English or other Western languages, more than speaking their tongue. So the good thing is African readers must invest into a young generation, telling them they must know how valuable African content is, and if not like that, we again as young generation, I see our sister there has tried to explain a lot, and I don't know why. You're from which country? Sorry, from Kenya, from Father Ruto, right? I think you have something. Ruto must see you are just like a gold under the mud. So we need to use some people like you to bring about the development of our countries in Africa. So again, on top of that, I would like to say that in order for our continent to be good in terms of development, we should not allow something like military to solve our problem. I mean, fighting things like M23 and other what I can say, other groups that are always used like the bridge to solve African problem. This should not be allowed, because you cannot solve the problem by using either guns or bombs. We should either use some mood discussion, and then from there again, I can say that one of the problems which is hiding African continent is that we have decided to take our power to other countries. For example, the pre-colonial or colonialists who served in our continent. So you can see Senegal, there is, I don't know, French, right? I don't know, Tanzania, there is some things like the United Kingdom, USA, I think even Kenya. So we must leave our continent, we must tell those people who are trying to pay like a friend in one side, but in another side are not a friend indeed, to live as free. Thank you.
So basically, you also support this African approach. So this young generation will give birth to a new leader that will be able to unite Congo. Okay, so let's read the raise his hand, and then other colleagues. So let us follow this sequence. I would like to hear your comments on question number 5. Should Russia interfere into this conflict? And if yes, if so, then how? So yeah, okay, let's go one after the other. Okay, I'll be very brief about the resolution. So, conflict resolution. I think that clearly we need to follow this formula, but the resolution should be on a bilateral approach. Clearly, Rwanda-Congo relations here are key. Rwanda has not just been using the resources in Congo, but also been ensuring the survival of this region. Because Rwanda has been bringing food to Eastern Congo and providing energy. And Congo, even if they want to introduce military control over that region, they have to deal with the fact that Rwanda has been playing a systemic role there. And Rwanda has been developing electrification very actively. So Rwanda will ensure that the infrastructure in Eastern Congo exists. That's one. And two, I would like to disagree with Claire. She said that growing population in that region will be a systemic challenge, and that the population growth can bring to major problems. It can, but only if this population growth is not accompanied by investments into infrastructure. Because East Rwanda is one of the densest populated countries worldwide. But if we look at it from a satellite, we see that there's lighting everywhere. All the intercity routes, all the streets in the cities have lighting in the night time. So, see population growth, but accompanied by investments in the infrastructure. So, and this is where the potential of the region lies. As for Russia's role, I'm sure that you all know the state of Russian embassies there. They're good, but they're severely understaffed. 3 or 4 diplomats would not be sufficient to take any systemic decisions. But the role of Russia can be as follows. Russia can play the role of a guarantor that certain decisions are made and then implemented. Dennis, for instance, mentioned in the first session that the Russian can help to localize the processing of mineral deposits, which will create jobs and improve the economics of the region. But it's not probable that Rwanda or Congo can build such processing plants. But Russia can help to train personnel, it can help to develop the legislative framework so that Congo or Rwanda would get more revenues into their budgets from selling royalties and licenses. Basically, clearly, we see now that there's a renewable energy projects that they can only survive because currently uh, local mineral deposits are very cheap. So if Russia can help to deal a major blow to globalists in that region. But, I think that Russia should make attempts to access Rwanda in the first place because the regime there is more stable than is in Congo. Rosatom has been working there, so we can build a system for communication there, which will be sustainable. Yes, so thank you very much. Ibajani, do you agree? The microphone, please. Yes, experienced. It's a fact. It's just a fact. Africa has been changing a lot in the past 5 to 10 years. Why? Because young people who decided that they should live a different life. I will give an example. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. I'll begin with Mali. Yes, it's a small country, blah, blah, blah. But when we had a problem with ECOWAS, they united their forces. You need Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And ECOWAS couldn't do anything. So they saw their potential. In that case, that was the military potential. Two, why I believe that we can do something, because we're going to have a new president today, the youngest president of Senegal. He does all he can do to help people. They won the election because 75% of the population of Senegal are people under 35 years. It's a fact. So things are changing. But we should also be fair to Congo. When Congo received her independence more than 60 years ago, there were very few people who had a university degree. But people grow. So we need to address the current problem. We need to reach regional integration. But some of the countries that exist in Africa, they were established 60 years ago. In certain cases, this does not coincide with the boundaries of local ethnicities. And last but not least, how can we help? BRICS. I really emphasize BRICS. The West doesn't want us to have relations with BRICS. Every year, Africa needs 90 billion of investments into the infrastructure. So, finding this 90 million, BRICS can find this. Not just find it, but also build this infrastructure. And last but not least, the role of Russia. Russia is a friend to all there. Russia can help these people to sit down and talk. For instance, last year, who could imagine that Iran and the Saudi Arabia would sit down and talk? But China has been able to help them to sit down and talk. Yeah. Okay. Yes, so that's about political will of some actors that can have a strong influence on people making decisions. Alexei and then Cleric. Yes, please. Yes, I would like to raise a humanitarian voice. We've been discussing the political aspects of a resolution. Clearly, a full-scale resolution can be only political, but I think they will agree that it's quite complicated. And so far, we don't see any good perspectives for political resolutions. But this does not mean that we shouldn't do anything. So, the conflict has been ongoing and will probably continue for many years more. So I think that one of the key factors that we could focus on is humanitarian activities, which includes Russia's policies there. Because humanitarian activities, and I will tell you what Russia can do. So this could be an entry point for Russia in that region. Could help Russia to develop her relations in that region. But the International Red Cross Committee has got three main recommendations that I could offer to you and to Russia as a state. To begin with, is the recognition of the international humanitarian right. For some people, this is something very abstract. But in actual fact, the more countries and states and military groups observe this international humanitarian rights, the less there's a potential for conflicts. Maxim, for instance, has mentioned that armed groups in Congo are in very bad state, which also influences that they are not capable of observing this international humanitarian right. So in theory, Russia could provide full-scale support to supporting the Congo military, organizational, training it, helping to organize, etc., etc. One more thing, the national humanitarian right is required not only to relieve the sufferings of concrete peoples at a given point in time, but it has got another important aspect to it. The thing is that by applying this right in good faith, you can support future peacekeeping initiatives, because the more parties adhere to it, the less there's cruelty in the conflict, the less there is hatred, the fewer there are obstacles that prevent peaceful resolution. So humanitarian right has got two main aspects. On one hand, it's the immediate effect, people don't suffer, and secondly, this helps the long-term peaceful resolution. Sorry, and in what format do you think this should work? What should Russia do? Should Russia apply to certain organizations? Should Russia offer such an initiative in the UN, or how? It's like this. There are several conventions which are key in this. Article number 1 is that parties should adhere to this right not only themselves, but should also help all other parties, all the actors, to observe this right as much as possible. So this is why Russia, as one of the countries that is a signatory to this Geneva Convention, Russia should also promote observation of this right. So what the IRCC quite often does, whenever says somebody has been violating this and punish this person, no, we're also always engaged in confidential dialogues with those who are in charge of, for instance, using the military. To the government of the Congo, for instance, the peoples of Congo, the warlords, etc., etc. Well, clearly Russia has got very good political connections to these countries. Russia could contribute to observation of this right in this way. Furthermore, there are program documents. And like I already said, also helping to build the military would be an indirect contribution to the observation of the international humanitarian right. One more thing. The International Red Cross Committee urges all the countries involved in this region, and Russia plays a major role in Africa, to support international humanitarian actors. If Russia could fund some humanitarian activities in that region, we would only encourage this. And in reacting to a humanitarian crisis, it is very important not only to provide some immediate support, we should also help the country to develop in all possible aspects, which Claire has mentioned. For instance, building communication routes. Like I said, one of the reasons it is very difficult for humanitarian rights to be implemented is because it is very difficult to communicate there. So, and last but not least, it is very important to remember this humanitarian crisis, because if you forget about this crisis, this is not funded. And underfunding is probably the main problem of humanitarian activity. So I encourage all of you as experts on this to continue covering this, not only in terms of political relation, but also in terms of humanitarian activities. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to cover this. Thank you. Yes, very good recommendations. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Claire to comment on this. I would like to ask Claire, and then I will ask Nikita probably to offer his legal recommendation, and then Alexander. If you have any ideas as to what you can say, please.
Очень кратко, буквально вот в паре фраз. Клэр, пожалуйста.
Thank you so much.
Claire,
First, I'd
please.
like to answer Adu's comment when I spoke about strong states. Of course, when we put Africa in the context of the international community, we can say that they are not strong state. When I speak about creation of DRC as a strong state, is in the context of having regional respect. No DRC head of state has regional respect, and the lack of this regional respect is what leads to the other countries wanting to intervene. And this lack of regional respect stems from them continually asking other countries to intervene in their own issues. Just to give an example, for example, when Kenya we had the crisis to 7 to 8, if we had involved the regional states, then we would have been forced to pay back somehow. You feel indebted. And this is the problem with DRC. So when I speak about the strong, is in the context of trying to free themselves from feeling they owe the neighboring state. And their continual ask for assistance from the regional states, especially neighboring states, will mean this neighboring state will need to be paid back. So that's what I meant in terms of strong state. And then in terms of intervention, when Svidrov was saying that Russia could help in localizing, but we have to understand why. There's no way anyone would assist you just like that. So that question of why should be answered first. And then after the why is answered is when now you could speak about the assisting. Now, in my opinion, of course, Russia could assist, but I think they could go back to the USSR model. By that I mean when USSR was training the Africans and then sending us back to our countries to develop our own industries. So of course, there could be the identification of the needs, and then the DRC could partner with Russia in terms of the DRC individuals themselves, and then they go back. For me, I think that would be a better way of trying to look for the cooperation, in the sense that even as you think about nationalizing maybe their industries, but they'll need the manpower. So instead of manpower coming from outside, whatever country it is, as long as it will continually come from outside, the problem will never be solved. So the issue could be by developing the Africans themselves. So if they really want to assist, in my opinion, is to go back to the USSR model in terms of the education, and then you go back to industrialize your own country. Yeah, so that's all. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. Well, actually, I don't think seeing a contradiction between what Sewell said and what you said. I think you just offered a broader perspective on what Sewell says. Maybe his main idea was that we should train Africans in Russia, and then they would get back to their home countries and they would localize production and develop their own industries in the broad sense of this word. Nick, has your comments, please, on what Alexei has mentioned. I would really want to say to hear what you have to say. Yeah, thank you very much. Before commenting, I would also, with your permission, say this. Firstly, I confirm that there's no military solution to this conflict. I say this again. I confirm this again. So the governments of these countries should find a solution together. Two, regional resolution must be used. So secondly, African organizations. These conflicts have a subsidiary nature. Decisions are made via regional organizations. But should this depends on the full commitment of the government. So this is another very important aspect. Also, one very important factor: the problems which are there are a legacy of the colonial times. The countries in Africa will have to deal with this. It is not in the West's interests that these problems are resolved. Divide and rule, that is their approach. So whether We want it not, but we need to prevent the West from using this divide and rule principle. I'm not a pessimist. No. When I'm saying that that's the way international order works, well, that's because that's how it is. I listed this Kenya, Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, and other countries in the Western Africa is not capable of taking their own decisions individually. Uh, uh, you will not be able to resolve a conflict using military approaches only. We have our own price. So if somebody from the outside comes and imposes their solutions, we'll have mass communications like in the Senegal. Take any African country, Mali, for instance. That's how it is. That's the way the world functions. So African countries may be too weak now. Yes, it will take some time. It will take another generation. But that's how it is currently. There's no other way you can act. So that's the only way they can do to find a humanitarian solution to this problem. I've taught a law for more than 10 years, and but we lawyers uh, live in our own universe, but the reality exists in a different universe. Reality keeps developing. For instance, I've been describing the situation in Ukraine. My publication will appear in the near future. The Geneva Convention was adopted in 1948. How much time has passed since then? Even from the point of view of technology and weapons, things have changed completely. So we need new laws, new frameworks now. The world keeps going, keeps developing. Yes, Articles 2 and 3, they sound very nice, but has this prevented the US from intervening in Vietnam, Iraq? Uh, uh, hmm. Has this been observed in Cote d'Ivoire, in DRC? No. But we should remember that there's a real life, and it takes certain skills to adjust it. I think that Russia has its own approaches to conflict resolution. And what is most important, that Russia should use the existing mechanism and should stay impartial. We should use the African Union, the SADC, the East African Union. Russia can support these organizations in the attempts to resolve these conflicts. We have traditional relations to some of the countries. We have, for instance, we've got good relations to Rwanda, and we should not ignore this. But we should, despite all this, find a resolution for the conflict in the eastern part of Congo. Thank you. Well, you raised us to this global level. You extrapolated this. My friends, we have got only 5 minutes left. And in 5 minutes' time, our carriage will turn into pumpkin, our translation will be discontinued, and the interpreters will not work anymore. I think we need to give the floor to my colleague, to Oleg, and then I will do the summing up. A very brief question, not a comment. I think my colleagues know what happened today. A new prime minister was appointed in Congo. She's a strong economist, at least what they say that she is. So, a question you this: will this new prime minister be able to influence the situation somehow? I think that's a question for all of us. That's a question for the homework. We will see some document and we will be able to think about it. So, Alexander Shapilov, please. As for Russia, it is quite clear that Paul Kagame in Rwanda, he received his university degree from the US, and Rwanda was a showcase for US policy in the region. But still, he was very closely involved in curtailing French interests in the region. Clearly, they have had some competition with other presidents, but Russia has got a very complex situation with France in Sahel. So I think we should not ignore a possibility to cooperate with Rwanda in this respect. And we should bear this in mind of our opinion on the Congo-Rwanda conflict. Thank you. Maxime Nicolin? Yes, I've been summing my thought a long time. As for Russia, I fully agree with what Dennis said and Vsevolod. How can we influence the situation? We can train people, and we can start doing this today, not tomorrow, not in a week's time, but today. And I would like to comment on what Alexei says about the involvement of Russian Federation in preparing, in training the DRC armed forces. I would be very skeptical here because the only case where we were able to create the military from scratch for a country was in the Central African Republic. And so far, it is too early to make any long-term conclusions. That's one. And two, that conflict in the DRC is the problem in the DRC is very complex. We need to understand very clearly what to make there, and how to make it. What will be the place of the local police and local militia and other structures? And there's one more problem, which should also be considered as part of the international humanitarian rights. It's the illegal imports and exports of weapons. If I represent a certain ethnos, what sense does it make for me to sit down and negotiate if I can use a very strong argument, meaning weapons? I'm not encouraged to negotiate because I can simply prove that I'm right because I have a lot of weapons. So this prevents from creating the right political culture, the culture of negotiation in the Western sense of this word. Yes, Oleg, please. Would you like me to sum up? No. I have a proposal about Russia. Without much ado, I would like to say that I would like to support the idea of BRICS involvement because Russia's presence in Africa is quite often perceived as a direct challenge, and neutral countries would be ready to and to react full scale to Russia only if they want to curtail the connections to France and other European countries completely. For instance, we've been hearing that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has now moved to Sudan as well. So I think that the countries from that region, the region of the Great African Lakes, would not be ready to stop the connection to the West completely to rely on Russia. I think Claire is right. You should select what is your side, choose your side in this conflict. And I think that politically, Russia is much closer related to Uganda and Burundi here than to Rwanda. So the summit and the voting in the UN General Assemblies when Uganda and Burundi would never vote for anti-Russian resolutions, and the DRC and the Rwanda would. So I think that we need to support Uganda and Burundi here. In view of this, I would like to support a recommendation to the BRICS to offer initiative, peace regulating, peace mediation initiative in that region. So far, BRICS has not been doing this. It has been more of a club, of a forum. But if we propose something like that, it would not be as opposed as direct Russia's mediation. That's one. And two, it will also mean that India and China would be involved, and India and China have got their own interests, and they're also perceived as actors in that region. Thank you, colleagues. So let's do the summing up. Yes, please. The microphone, please. Please turn on the microphone. The interpreter cannot hear anything. Please. Well, that's always the case. The best ideas occur at the very end of the discussion. But I think you proposed a very interesting line of thought from experts. So let's do the very brief summing up. As for question one, we have concluded that conflict is at the interstate level, but with the ethnic background. As for main factors, we have not been able to find one particular factor. Like it is the case in many conflicts, it has a long history. Political aspects, weak central government that has not been able to unite Congo economically, that cannot take command of its own resources. The trend to reorient the flows of the natural mineral deposits outside of Congo, but also the inter-ethnic aspects and the spillover effect, where our conflict will spill over a national boundary. As for the third item, we see the countries involved. Not all the parties are interested in this finding an immediate resolution to this conflict, because this will uh, uh, break the existing balance. So a lot depends on strengthening of the Congo government and on the political will of all the parties involved in this conflict. As for question number 4, who should take the lead in regulating in settling the conflict? We have heard a number of very interesting ideas. Clearly, it should firstly be settled between all the parties involved in the military conflict. If the regional mechanisms fail to work, then we can engage BRICS and international influence. Because the current mechanisms would rather be against this. No one wants DRC to become a stronger player. As for the perfect formula for Congo Rwanda settlement, we will not list all the steps, but the main thing is that it is not an easy solution. It's not just 2 and 2 makes 4. The military should be structured better. It should integrate the existing military groups. But the most important conclusion is that there's no military solution to this. There's no solution in the court either. We should look for a solution in the legal field, though, and this is where Russia could lend a helping hand, namely offer some solutions under the BRICS aegis. And we should agree to Johan Galtung, the Norwegian researcher, who says that we need to look for positive peace. Because peace is not only about military successes, it's about unity, social unity. It's about a situation where all the parties are satisfied with everything. So this support of African sovereignty by developing the sovereignty of Congo, and should Russia rely on Rwanda or Uganda? I don't think we need to hurry. Well, Russia has got very clear interests on one of these countries, so I'd rather suggest that Russia should play a peace mediation role here. But I will leave this for our esteemed experts to discuss and to think. And now I would like to thank all of you for your participation. I would like to thank Tatjana Bagdasarova for her efforts to organize this. The RIAC has become a very good venue, a very good place where African experts can discuss this. So we have here the Institute of People's Friendship, the Russian African Studies Institute, the Valde Club, the Journalist History Institute, and other academic circles from Russia. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Oleg for being with us, and hope to see you again. Thank you, and goodbye. I would like to thank you. I'd like to thank Claire Moha for helping us to find the context of our African colleagues. Thank you, and goodbye.